for the Plan Commission meeting for Wednesday, August 16th. Roll call, please.
Goslin?
Here.
Harms? Here. Joseph? Here. Lalonde?
Here.
McGrail?
Here.
Peterson? And Schneider.
Here. Anything to be removed, added, or changed? Great. First of all, I want to welcome a new commissioner tonight, right into the fire. Bill McGrail. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you aboard. This is a continuation of the review of the Campana development from August 16th. The meeting ran till 10 o'clock, and we decided to continue it to tonight. I just want to thank you all for attending. I had made a previous statement. I'm not going to repeat it all, but there was a lot of public comment. This being a continuance, we want to make sure that everybody is heard, but we would appreciate not a lot of repetition in what we've already heard. And to that end, the things that we heard a lot about were concerns about increased traffic, parking, stormwater, pedestrian safety, sidewalks, health concerns related to the telecommunication equipment and hazardous materials, conformance to a comprehensive plan and zoning code, effect to real estate taxes and property taxes, increased crime, noise, child safety, the effect on schools, jurisdictional issues related to KDOT, City of Geneva, city services, and need for affordable and accessible housing. So if you want to speak on those topics tonight, please keep your comments brief. Again, you can just come up and state that I'm in agreement with such and such comment. If you have something new to speak about, let's keep it ideally in the 3-minute range, just for the purposes of getting everybody time available to speak. So what we're going to do is reopen the public hearing. We're going to, I don't know if the staff is going to give a brief update, and then we'll go right into continuing with the list we had from last time of those who did not get an opportunity to speak. Hopefully you've returned. If not, there is a sign-in sheet. I see a lot of people have signed in. There may be some repetition on that sheet. We'll be checking just to make sure that we get everybody who hasn't spoken a chance to speak before people are able to come back and revisit the podium. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to reopen the public hearing.
Also moved.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so public hearing is reopened, and staff, you want to give us an update?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for summarizing the issues that were brought up at the previous hearing. Staff continues to be supportive of this proposal to add multifamily residences to the Campana building. The property's mixed-use district classification specifically allows multifamily residences in a mixed-use building. Some requested zoning code modifications are relatively minor, and some are caused by review of other entities that have jurisdiction on this property. The modification for parking supply includes the safety valve of land-banked parking, whereby the city can require additional parking to be provided if needed. The mechanism to apply this requirement will be finalized for City Council Committee of the Whole consideration. Both Erickson Engineering and KLOA, which was a neighboring residence consulting traffic engineer, found that the proposed 206 parking spaces would be sufficient for the proposed uses. The zoning modification to allow the existing mobile communication equipment does not allow these facilities to operate outside of applicable federal restrictions on cellular antenna operations. The city's prohibition of such facilities is intended to deter a proliferation in residential areas. The traffic generation by replacement of non-residential building space with the proposed residences would not result in a significant change to the volume of traffic in the area as confirmed by Erickson Engineering and KLOA. KDOT and KLOA suggest conditions at the Fabian Batavia Avenue intersection could be improved with changes to site access and with roadway improvements. Staff agrees with this, but city approval of this proposal cannot dictate conditions in KDOT and IDOT rights-of-way. The city suggested and Evergreen agreed to propose dedication of right-of-way. This land would be essentially acquired by those agencies, which would save taxpayer money for those agencies to acquire the land. Evergreen's proposed Fabian crosswalk will provide a signalized pedestrian crossing where none exists now, and Evergreen has agreed to construct a sidewalk along their Fabian Parkway frontage. Other traffic and pedestrian safety measures can be implemented by KDOT and IDOT. Concerns of noise included statements about truck staging north of the building's west wing, made possible by the existing building owner. With either the proposed outdoor use space or parking in that area, Evergreen would not make that area available for truck staging. Mobile communication equipment energy level restrictions are enforced by the Federal Communications Commission and cannot be regulated by the city. The city is unaware of any Federal Communications Commission's findings of violations. If the zoning for this development is approved, the building permit process will verify that all city codes related to stormwater management and hazardous material abatement are met before a building permit is approved. Before the hearing, I passed out to the commissioners a collection of additional correspondences that the city has received. Among those, the city received a letter from the Geneva Community School District Superintendent, Dr. Kent Muchler. This letter welcomes all residents and commits to serve all students in the district. The city received a letter from Attorney Stephen Cooper, who represents a couple of area residents, one of whom spoke on August 2nd. The letter states that the position of the objectors is that the proposal does not qualify for a planned development. The zoning code states that a planned development may be adopted for one or more specific listed reasons in the code. The proposed planned development seeks modification from the development regulations of the zoning code, and it would permit a mixed-use development that is unique in Batavia. These represent 2 of the 4 stated reasons to adopt a planned development overlay. Staff agrees with the letter's suggestion that approval of a planned development include mandates to require Evergreen to build the land bank parking if necessary. At this point, the commission shall continue with the public hearing and its consideration of the design review and the plat of subdivision. After the commission has determined that it has all the information needed to deliberate the matters at hand, the commission should close the hearing and deliberate in an open meeting. If the hour is late, the commission may continue its deliberation and/or take action at a subsequent meeting, announcing the date, time, and place before voting on such a motion. When the commission is prepared to take action on the plan development or design review, the commission must first have arrived at findings for the plan development and design review. Action on the plat of subdivision does not require findings, and staff will provide information to the commission, will provide information to aid the commission in reaching the required findings when the commission is prepared to address the findings. Staff will also provide its recommendations on commission actions at that time.
Thank you. So we're going to continue hearing public testimony. Again, as I mentioned, we're going to start where we left off with the list from 2 weeks ago. I did mention, please be respectful, whether you agree or disagree with the speaker, by not applauding or calling out during the meeting. If it gets out of hand, I'll have to get control of the meeting. I don't want to do that. Last time went very well overall, so we really appreciate that. With that said, let's go to our list and continue the public testimony.
Okay, leaving off, we did skip a couple of people, I think because they were not here, so I'll call their name. Dallas Heikkinen? I spoke. Did you? I'm sorry, okay. Maybe I just didn't check you off, I apologize. Next, we have Betsy Zinzer. And then after that, we have John Hunter. And then Barb Tate.
Is John in the room? Okay, just want to make sure you guys are ready to step to the podium.
Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity to speak about the need for affordable housing in Batavia. And I apologize if I'm repetitive of something that was said last time, as I was not here for the full meeting last time. My name is Betsy Zinzer, and for the past year and a half, I have served as the executive director of the Batavia Interfaith Food Pantry and Clothes Closet. In 2016, we served 670 different families of Batavia Township who came for groceries and gently used clothing. These folks are a combination of retirees, families with 2 wage earners working more than one job, veterans, disabled individuals, unemployed, recently divorced, and those struggling with expensive medical issues. We don't need to look far for families who need affordable housing. Too much of income is allocated to rent or mortgage payments, and small financial pressures can bring new families to our door. In the first half of this week, 8 new families came. School started. Registration fees and school supplies ate into what was left of paychecks, and parents needed help with groceries and were hoping to find gym shoes. When housing costs absorb close to 50% of your income, there isn't enough left to handle unexpected costs like a broken car, a week out of work due to the flu, or short-term job loss. As studies show, Batavia and Geneva need more affordable housing. The bulk of the proposed Campana housing, 48 units, provides affordable housing to families earning between 30 and 50% of adjusted median income, or roughly between $20,000 to $40,000 a year. These aren't poor people. They aren't a threat to Batavia and Geneva because they're already here. People in this income bracket work cleaning rooms and serving meals at Homestead and Batavia Rehab. They are writers, artists, teacher aides. They work at Walmart, the Jewel, McDonald's. They serve on church committees and coach Little League teams. At the pantry, we also witnessed that affordable housing is critical for divorced families. When incomes split in 2, local affordable housing is needed so that kids can stay in the school they know. Only a small portion of the Campana project, just 16 units, is reserved for those with income below 30% of average median income. Half of these are reserved for disabled citizens, and it is not enough. We need this project. Over the years, as Batavia has grown, new developments have catered almost exclusively to higher income buyers. If we want to maintain the traditional character of our community, as I do, we need to increase affordable housing at the same rate as we offer larger, more expensive homes. It is time. Thank you.
Thank you. Who is after?
John Hunter is next, and then Barb Tate.
Is Barb here? Yes. Great, thanks.
And just so you know, I'm sorry, if you signed up already today and you were signed up before, I'll call your name first, and I'll skip it if you signed up this evening, too. So.
Hi, my name is John Hunter. I've been working out of the Campana building since 2001. I just had some comments and questions that I wanted to make now regarding the nuts and bolts of this project, and then perhaps I'd like to come back a little later to make some other statements, if that's okay with the commission.
Absolutely, but again, we want to give everybody a chance to speak at least once.
Understood.
Then we're probably going to have the applicant respond to the majority of the questions that have already been asked.
That's kind of what I
Issues, I
was
should say.
thinking. Okay,
So it could be late into the evening.
great. I'll be here. I'm just going to go through the list as they were put forth. So for the number one, the minimum parking setback, my feeling is that no variation should be allowed due to these spaces being too close to the throat of Fabian Parkway. And those spaces then would also impede the connector lane that is going around from the front to the side. I have another note here that KDOT had noted concerns over the delays or backups at the Campana entrance due to the proximity of the throat and the mattress store parking area, and the connector road. Do you know, if this backup will affect access for emergency vehicles, and will they be able to enter the site if there is a backup? And another concern would also be the turning radius within that entrance there. So that was just number one on there. On number two, the land use mix, I was wondering if someone could explain more about the subdivision of the property, because I think that is going to affect the land use mix. I'm not sure. I'd like to get more information on that, either from the commission or from the applicant, to find out, what brought that about. As far as the transparency on the vision glass for the south side of the building and the east side of the building, I think that, I could be mistaken, I think it was determined at the historic preservation meeting that the north and south wings are considered historic in this case. And so.
The north and south wings are not considered historic, I don't believe.
Okay, I'm not.
Therefore, they're allowing additional leeway in the fenestration.
Okay, because I understood that they withdrew the.
Well, the issue on the north-facing wall is not subject to the zoning code's requirements for transparency. The south
Understood.
and the east are.
Correct. All right. And so will there be vertical windows on the east face of the south wing is a question.
We understood from the Historic Preservation Commission review that there has been a change to those windows from what was presented to the Plan Commission the last time. That does not affect the variance that's needed.
I see.
Or I shouldn't say variance, that does not affect the zoning code modification related to vision glass that's needed.
Okay, so then to address the transparency glass issue, even though the sight line from Batavia Avenue is quite far from Batavia Avenue to that east face of the south wing there, as you're going down Fabian Parkway, though, it would be very easy to see into the windows that are on the east side as you're traveling west on Fabian Parkway. So to speak to that, I don't see why you would need a variance on that, because if you're allowed to put windows on there, then perhaps the windows could be put on there to meet the transparency requirements.
Absolutely, they could be, but there are other jurisdictions that would need to review the fit of any window change on that facade.
Could you name those jurisdictions for me, please?
I'm sorry? Just quickly, it would be the Batavia Historic Preservation Commission, the National Park Service, and Kane County, I think would also review that,
Okay, thank you.
and the Illinois State Historic Preservation Office.
So a number of
Yes.
different offices there. Okay, thanks for that. So then going on to the entrances, I would say that, anybody who might live in this proposed building would run a test, and anyone who might be even voting on this should try to take, say, 8 bags of groceries from the furthest parking spot in the front there and carry it to the front of the building, and then further carry them to an apartment that might be 100 feet down the hall, down the central hall. It's quite a haul there. And so I feel that that the variation for entrances should not be granted, because that having additional entrances would shorten the walk for a person that might be coming in there, as well as allow additional egress points in the building. As far as number 5, the parking field landscape separation, could you answer how often that you grant variances on something like this, as far as the city in your experience? Is there a reason why we need a variance for this?
I think under the terms of the public hearing, if you could just list your questions, I don't think we're going to answer them individually until we get to the end, please.
Okay, and that's something that I thought that we probably should establish early on, because I have a feeling that there's going to be an awful lot of questions tonight.
Understood.
So, okay, if you guys keeping track of my questions, that's fine. I did wanted to ask, though, at what point in the proceedings will we be taking an answer break, so to speak? Or are we just going to wait for the full time and then get answers? I kind of feel that maybe we should get some answers earlier on, so that some of us who still have unanswered questions might come back and reiterate our questions.
If there's an issue with time tonight, and we usually like to try to cut it off around 10, because everybody gets pretty weary by that point,
Sure.
then we would continue the public hearing. The goal tonight is to get the applicant to speak, so we may stop the public testimony at some point, have them come up, answer to a lot of the comments and questions from the last meeting and whatever they've heard tonight.
And then would the public again have an opportunity
Absolutely.
to respond?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you. As far as the parking supply goes, I just wanted to make a note on that. Number one, I think that you should say no to land bank parking, for the reason being that isn't it a good standard and procedure to do the stormwater engineering prior to something like this, rather than just do a wait and see kind of thing? Because I wanted to say, Mr. Strassman, that I don't believe that the KLOA study agrees with the Erickson engineering study. Just wanted to get that out there. There are a number of points where they actually do disagree. I don't have the study with me in front of me, but I think that was kind of a broad generalization there. But as far as the parking supply goes, I wanted to say that perhaps the commercial buildings that are going to be there won't always have the tenant that is there, and might have a different use, which might require more parking. And so I just want to make sure that we're looking forward a little bit as far as the parking goes. And so that's one of the aspects that I feel that you should say no to that variance on the land bank parking. We don't know. I mean, holidays and that will create, there are certain times where it will create a high number of parking spaces needed. And so I just want to make sure that that is taken into consideration prior. The monument sign landscaping issue, number 7, I really can't say, one way or the other. It just seems like if the landscaping is done tastefully, then, I don't see the harm. The question is going to be the setbacks from both Batavia Avenue as well as Fabian Parkway, and how far from the street those signs are going to be. For number 8, again, it's the same kind of thing. I mean, why do we need to, I'm not sure I understand why we need a zoning variance for this. Is it just by virtue of the sign setback? Or is it because the KDOT report has identified that there might be more of a setback than initially thought? So that's a question for you there for later. And then lastly, the wireless communication facility support structure. I would like some clarification on the code there. I kind of had a look over it, and I didn't really see anything specifying that this was intended for single-family residences so that a guy who has a half acre doesn't put a cell tower in his backyard. So if you could please clarify that for us a bit, and what the real intent of that ordinance is, I'd be grateful for that. As far as the plat of subdivision, I think I covered that already. I'd like to get more information as to why this is necessary. And is it necessary to get around a parking restriction? Is it necessary to get around some other restriction? And second question would be that, is that going to change the MU district zoning for that building? Because if the original historic structure just becomes residential, then would that not preclude the mixed-use part of it? So if you could please, elaborate on that, I'd appreciate that. And then as far as the design review goes, bear with me one second here. It looks like so many aspects of this building are going to affect the historic visage of the building itself in so many ways that I'm kind of skeptical that the finished product is really going to look anything like the historic building. So I would like either the applicant or the commission to kind of fill that out for us a little bit, because when I consider the parking changes, the slip road, the lights on the lights on 10-foot poles with 18-inch pylons, concrete, that's really going to change the view from the east looking west. And so I don't know how much historic preservation is really going to be there by the time they're done. So, and I guess that's it. That's it for now. And then I'd wait for answers to the questions. And then if I may come back and make further comments, I'll sign up on the sheet again at the end.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Next is Barb Tate. And then after that, Vicki Lamb.
Is Vicky here? Don't see it. So after Vicky, we have
Joshua Tate.
Joshua Tate.
No relation. Barbara Tate, I live at 2017 Allen Drive. I don't want to repeat too much about the parking, but looking at this diagram, I don't see the tot lot and the soccer field. That was what I was going to ask about, because I don't understand this land bank parking. I don't understand why we would have to wait for it. It just seems like if we're going to have issues with parking, and like Mayor Schilke had said, that you end up with people like parking in the fire lanes and things like that. Why don't we just establish lots of parking and put the tot lot maybe in the front yard, because it's just kids running around, and if it's a soccer field, you spray some paint on the grass. So I kind of need some clarification about why wait. And the other thing I was thinking about too is if this parking situation isn't curbed and people are just going to start parking in fire lanes, what's to stop them from parking in the tot lot or wherever they find a spot? If we are going to have curbs, Will there be assigned parking? Will every homeowner have 1 or 2 spots? And they know that that's their spot? If they're handicapped or elderly, maybe they're closer to the doorways, that sort of stuff. If it's going to be really tight, what happens at the holidays when, they want to have family come visit? Where are those people going to park? So they maybe are going to go across the street and in the Forest Preserve lot or the retirement center or Allen Drive. I live on Allen Drive, and I was thinking, gosh, we can't even park our cars there. If it's a snowy night, you get a ticket, so you can't have your guests parking, not knowing that that's a different town and, different city regulations and such. Kind of lost my train of thought there. Okay, so if they are scrambling, trying to find places to park, and they end up on Allen, we don't have any sidewalks, so I'm thinking their guests are going to be looking, they'll see the tower and go, okay, I know I have to head that way, and they're going to have to come through our yards, and, it just seems like we should have sidewalks or something. But anyway, back to my first point, I don't even see the tot lot, so I don't know if this parking diagram, have they solved the issue of we don't have. So that area there should be done with the other parking, because if we have to do that later on because people are scrambling trying to find parking, if we do it all up front, it just seems like it would make more sense. You tear up the ground all at once, establish lots of parking for everybody. If you do it later, you're going to have all those construction vehicles, and where are they supposed to park when they're just coming home from work? And now they've lost that parking lot too. So, sorry, I didn't mean to be repetitious and talk too much about parking, but that's all I got.
Thank you.
And this little guy coming up behind me is another Tate, not me. Not a relation.
Vicki Lamb and then Joshua Tate.
Vicky's not here.
Joshua Tate and then Jim Erickson.
When he calls your name, if you could just give some recognition that you're here so we know and we can keep this moving. So do we have Jim Erickson here? Okay.
Good evening, Commission. I appreciate you giving me the time to speak. And to my non-relation prior, I appreciate you referring to me as little or small. So, what I wanted to talk to you guys tonight about was imploring on your duties and your responsibilities as a commission to make decisions for the good of the residents and the community. And I don't do this ignorantly or arrogantly. In my former community, before I lived in the Fox Valley, I spent 6 years as an elected park commissioner, serving 5 of those years as the president and needing to chair meetings and keep them under control. So I recognize the challenges that you have ahead of you, especially with a very hotly contested subject as this. And so with that, one of my first points here is, obviously I said I'm from Geneva, but I also have a mother who lives just a few blocks away from the development on Ponca Drive in Batavia. So I'm representing interests from multiple jurisdictions here. And if I could refer you to your comprehensive master plan, as has been done in other ways, there's a regional and interjurisdictional issues section where it talks about how the external effects of decisions that you make could have profound effects outside of your actual jurisdiction. And obviously the location of this development being Batavia, nestled kind of right into the little cradle of Geneva there, multi-jurisdictional. It's my feeling that obviously this development proposition definitely implores you to consider residents from multiple communities, even though many of us don't necessarily vote here. Some of us have relatives who do, and we do vote in jurisdictions where you are impacting us. I also wanted to remind the commission that Evergreen is a business. And the last time you had this hearing, there was a gentleman who brought up a lot of points about that. You're going to hear things publicly, privately, back channels, tugging on different emotional strings. But ultimately, Evergreen is not here out of the goodness out of their hearts. They're here to utilize a system that provides business benefits to them. Campana happens to be in the middle of that. And I'm not unsympathetic to the mission that they claim is their mission. In my former community, my father, he spent 20-some years developing low-income, affordable housing. I worked with my father. I worked in those buildings. I worked with those people. So my points are not about the intent that they say this development is. It's about Evergreen being a business attempting to fit, in my opinion, a square peg into a round hole. I'm not going to go through the exhaustive list that folks before me and after me will continue to point out about how this particular site plan, etc., very much feels like a square peg in a round hole. I want to continue to impress upon you that your duties as appointed members of this commission, representing voters, representing residents, that's where your allegiances should lie, to the residents, to the voters. I don't believe that that is where Evergreen's allegiances lie, as they're asking you for variances on so many levels from your existing zoning code. An example, I don't think that's been brought up yet, so I hope I'm not being repetitive, is modification to a requirement that there's a minimum of 25% first floor square footage adjacent to a public street requiring or being used for retail. I know that their argument for this variance is that it's hard to get retail, can't see it, yada, yada, yada. But if their allegiances were to the future residents who may be living in this facility and the density that they're proposing to be in there, then I don't see how retail is a problem, serving basic services to the residents who live there, where a variance to this would be sending them out into all the unsafe traffic and lack of walkways and everything else cited by other folks. Your plan does state that you should be maintaining an attractive place to live, work, shop, and play, and a balance of land uses. And so variances for a use like this that can support those multi-uses, I don't think that you should be granting variances for. So again, I just want to reiterate my point that you're in a very tough position, and I'm sympathetic to that. I've been there before. But please remember that your duty and your obligations are to the residents. Those are people who live here already. And your duties are executed through sound judgment and interpretation of the policies, the code, the legislation that you have in place. And so a business, again, Evergreen is a business. So a business that constantly asks you for variances and compromising what you have all dictated and approved as the necessary legislation to guide Batavia, I don't think that they truly have Batavia's interest in mind, let alone the jurisdictions who are also impacted. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
I'm just going to make a comment here. We've been at it going on 40 minutes, and we've had 4 people speak. So, again, I'm going to request brevity, not repetition of previously stated comments, just agreement with them. Thank you.
I'm sorry, next is Jim Erickson.
Jim Erickson is my husband, and he's sick, so he has to, for me. I'm Emily Erickson,
You've already
his
spoken?
wife.
You've already spoken.
I have, but he was up next. He was here at the last meeting. He's sick tonight, and I have a printout that he wanted me to speak in place of him.
She can submit or she's got to leave.
Yeah, if you don't mind, we'd prefer you wait and not speak again.
She can submit the petition, but as for speaking.
Yeah, you could submit that to us. We've got a lot of people that haven't spoken
But
yet.
this is what he was planning on speaking to.
I know.
So you won't let me speak?
No, you can, you just have to wait until others speak,
Okay.
please. Thank you.
Next is Steve Tate.
My name is Steve Tate. I'm related to the lady Tate, not the gentleman Tate. I have 3 points I'd like to reference. First is my understanding that the eight state referral network units are targeted for the disabled who, according to the Illinois Housing Development Authority, may have illnesses including but not limited to physical or mental limitations, substance abuse disorder, HIV/AIDS, or are homeless or at risk for homelessness. On July 17th, Evergreen stated that the building, due to its historical nature, will not be appropriate for certain individuals with a disability. Due to those comments, there should be concern that the nature of this building may not be a good fit for those who are wheelchair-bound. Will any of the individuals slated to live in those 8 units be in wheelchairs? And if so, will there be emergency protocol in place, and will exits be adequate in both number and size to accommodate them? Second, should the need for the land-based parking be exercised in the future, it must be considered as part of the current project when calculating runoff water. Excuse me. If this project is approved and at some point in the future it's determined more parking is needed, it may be forgotten that the runoff was at a questionable stage when the initial construction was completed. Detention, either surface or underground, has to be considered for the project in its entirety, not as just small portions that might be completed incrementally. The grade both north and west of the building slope into the adjacent properties, and although I'm not a civil engineer, I do recognize that water runs downhill and doesn't stop at a property line. Finally, I know traffic has been discussed at length, but I would encourage you all to go out and do your own traffic study. Go out between 6 and 8 any morning, Monday through Friday, and again between 4 and 6. Turn left from Fabian into the Campana building, come back out, turn left again, turn left on 31 and left back into Campana from 31. I think you'll find that you'll get a real feel for what the potential residents of Campana might be dealing with on a daily basis. And 2, you'll spend as much time looking in your rearview mirror at the cars that are coming at you between 40 and 50 miles an hour as you do waiting for a slot to turn into it. I've lived there for 20 years, and we've heard not only accidents that occur, but also the screeching tires of near misses. There have been hundreds of accidents on Fabian between Kirk and Randall Roads, ranging from minor fender benders to fatalities. Several years ago, one of my employees had a head-on collision waiting to turn at Fabian. Fortunately, no one was hurt. Unfortunately, the same luck was not with a Geneva resident who was involved in one of the 70-plus accidents that have occurred at the same spot in the last 2 years. He was killed on October 13th, 2015. We're concerned not only with our safety, but that of our daughter and son-in-law who also have a home in Allendale. In less than 2 months, we'll have a grandchild who will grow up there. Should approval of this project be recommended and the Committee of the Whole agrees, the result will be an increase in traffic and consequently an increase in accidents. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do I just go over and tell them?
Next is Jamie Tate.
Chairman? Chairman? I feel that, you said we had four people talk within 40 minutes. I think if people don't stick to the 3 minutes that you recommended, we're not going to get through very much tonight. So maybe you could reiterate the fact that they should stick to the 3 minutes and not repeat so many things that have already been talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying that, so.
I know, but maybe.
I'll
if
try
you
really
said-
hard, but it's hard when you say that when I come up here.
I'm sorry,
No,
what
it's
was
okay.
that?
I'll try really hard to stick to the 3 minutes. Okay. Jamie Tate, I live at 342 Wakefield Lane. I'm also up here for my parents who live in Batavia at 515 North Van Nortwick. They've just moved here in the last couple months. Want to also reiterate the thank you to you guys. In my previous community, I used to work on the Plan Commission. I was on it for 8 years and served 2 years as chairman. I also have a background in municipal planning, worked as a municipal planner for over 10 years. So I'm kind of coming at you tonight with what I would look at if I were you sitting up there. So first, my question for the developer, my question for anyone is the van parking that's in the rear. Just kind of curious if there's been a semi-trailer turning movement demonstration that's been done. I'm gonna go ahead and pass around. I have some pictures. You guys can keep these. I only have one set, just because my printer at home, I don't have a bunch of paper. But I was on the site in June, just kind of driving around, and because it's what I used to do, is drive sites, especially when there's a proposal in front of me. And there was a truck parked at 11 o'clock in the morning in the loading area, and there was no way anybody safely could get through there. So right now, I don't believe that it's changing the way that it's proposed. Right now, that semi-truck would back up into that van parking, and then if you have that future parking that they're gonna put in, possibly in that phase one, it would not work at all. So I think that needs to be consideration, definitely explored a little bit more. Number two, is there a loading area for residents and visitors in the front? Right now, as someone said before, you're gonna have somebody parking in that parking spot that's all the way to the east, walking with groceries. I think a good consideration would be to put in a loading area. That would be for your Amazon trucks. It's going to be for UPS trucks, your FedEx, for all the residents that are going to live there. As we know, online shopping is huge, improving and growing every year. So people are going to be getting deliveries from all of those. And my concern would be all those trucks or those residents, when they are unloading, are going to park in the handicap parking stalls. And then you're going to have issues of blocking drives. People aren't going to be able to park up there. So I really think a loading area is huge. Sidewalk along 31, I know it's been talked about. My whole thing, IDOT, which I don't think IDOT's comments have come back yet, which are huge. IDOT is I've adopted policy. It's called Complete Streets. Basically what they do is they don't just look at a street for just vehicles moving forward. They look at pedestrians, they look at bikes, they look at everything. So anytime IDOT builds new roads now, they always build multi-use paths. I believe that they're going to be supportive of a sidewalk along that Route 31. I can't believe that they wouldn't. I've actually already been in contact with them about it because I think Complete Streets is a great movement. It's a great planning movement that a lot of communities, counties, IDOT has even adopted it. I have some comments on the plat. I know he mentioned before that they don't plan on selling the other lot. It's written, for the two lots. I looked, and this is kind of, you guys vote on the plat, so that's why I'm talking about it. It's kind of boring. No one wants to hear about it, but in the first plat, there was access easements, and in the second, there's not. So I'm kind of curious how that's going to work for access between the two lots now. Say it does become two different property owners. Maybe right now it's not, but say 10 years down the line, they sell it off, they go bankrupt, they go into foreclosure, who knows what happens. You have a new owner. How does access work with maintenance? How does sign maintenance work? How does landscaping work when you have two different lots? And I didn't see that laid out in the plat and any of the notes. I also saw a reference to Lot 3 in the new plat, which I didn't find a Lot 3 on the new plat, and that was in the notes. I won't talk about stormwater. Landscaping, the landscaping that's along Route 31 that can't be placed there because of the historic preservation, is the developer putting that somewhere else on the site. A lot of times when I've seen relief from other projects like that, because they can't put it there doesn't mean they should be relieved of that landscaping. It's a big site, there's plenty of spots. We can go ahead and figure out what that landscaping would have been and move it somewhere else on the site. Also had some comments about the clustering of the trees in the landscaping. There's a lot of trees in the back, like the swamp white oaks, that's 14 in a row. You've got some 13 in a row, and traditionally in the plans now you don't like to see more than 8 species in a row. And that keeps from if there's ever disease. So I would say kind of break that up. That would be a suggestion for me. Another comment I have is about the phrase of saving the site and the building. I have a little, when it comes to saving the site and keeping a property up, the current property owner should be keeping the property up. The city of Batavia has codes in place. You have the property maintenance code. You have zoning code in place. you could be working with the owner to pave certain areas of the site, stripe the site. They have right now dilapidated, faded handicap parking stalls in front of the mattress store. You can't even read them. I think it says that the fine is $100, which now state law is $250. So yes, I understand they can come and make improvements, but there also are codes in place currently that you guys can be working with the property owner to bring up to date. I wanted to mention the sign, the multi-tenant sign along Fabian. They're proposing a multi-tenant sign that's like aluminum post sign with all the talk of historic preservation. I was really hoping to see something that maybe would follow like an Art Deco theme, make it a little bit prettier than a standard aluminum, multi-tenant sign. Also on that sign has, they're asking for the variance for the setback. Has anybody taken the vision into consideration for that? There's so much talk about the traffic on that street and the danger that I would hope that you're taking a look and making sure that, because it's I think a 6-foot sign, you can see making movements, whether or not it's the pedestrians or the cars that are along there. And then lastly, I'm just going to talk about parking only because I took a look at the American Planning Association. They have a standard of parking, and whenever I did parking variances, it's something that I always reference, and I haven't heard that reference yet. I've heard a lot of ITE talk, but basically I took a look at what they would recommend for parking. They basically confirmed your Batavia's code for the most part. They did say, your volleyball requirement is really high. Theirs would be more like, I think it was requiring 86 parking stalls. Theirs would be more like 43, so it would half of that. Also, the multifamily requirements, a little bit on the high end as well. The APA, American Planning Association, would recommend somewhere between 105 and 160 parking stalls. So you can understand the difference. Obviously, they're looking at a more urban versus suburban context. So in an urban context, you would need less parking. We're suburban, so we're probably towards the higher a little bit more. I just kind of threw that number in the middle just for the sake of the calculation. So with that, basically the APA, from what I read in this book, which is the Parking Standards Planning Advisory Service Report, that I'm sure some in the room have heard of, is about 238 parking stalls. So you're on it about, and I'd be more than happy to give everybody my calculation of how I came up with that. Close to, what they're requiring, but kind of going on that land banking thing of why it's important that maybe you just build them in the beginning. And then my last one is making Kane, I don't know if anybody's talked about this either, but making Kane County Fit for Kids initiative. It's something that the county promotes. I was actually at a presentation before at a national conference where they got awarded an award for this. And my comment on that is, how does busing kids to school and not provide sidewalks and a safe way to school fit in with making Kane County Fit for Kids? A statement they say is, together we will create parks, streets, neighborhoods, and schools that are fit for kids, making them safe and ready for kids to bike, walk, and play. They also promote healthy eating. Another suggestion is maybe they should put a community garden in to the site as well to teach everybody healthy eating. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next, we have a series of people that are probably not going to speak. Nicolette, Dennis Langley, Steve Friedland, Holly Kuehl, Steve Corcoran, and Tim Brown. Is that who's going to defer? Okay. And then Mike Renner also. Okay. Then Catherine Sandman is the next person. And then after that is Ron Rulo. Any of those? Okay. After that is Maria Kuhn, possibly Kuhn? No? Eric Landon, Gary Honeyman, Lane Allen,
I think I'll hit the 3-minute rule. Lane Allen, resident, 225 Union. I'm also the chairman of the Kane County Home Commission. which helps finance affordable housing in Batavia, from Batavia to Elgin. I'm also a Kane County architect and have done multifamily housing, IDPH housing, and important historic preservation projects. I'm an optimist. I look at the Campana project as a glass half full, an unfinished project that needs some immediate TLC. I see a holistic neighborhood developing with families and kids, building friendships. I see attractive families, being holistic and making things happen in Kane County. I see parents who are employed locally and able to get home in 15 minutes. I see kids playing tag in the front yard and on bicycles going on bike paths and enjoying the beauty of Kane County. First point, we all deal with traffic in our communities. In my opinion, to use traffic-related issues and concerns to stop a development that's not really a balanced, that doesn't take into consideration all of the potential of this project. And some people say if you talk about traffic and parking, maybe you're part of the problem. I mean, we're all part of that problem. And so I just think it's an easy target, but we've got to be careful of overstating it. I wanted to expand on the comments of profit as well as quality. As an architect, I am challenged daily with my clients to find the right budget for projects and help developers create a financially feasible project. This architect and developer have an overwhelming challenge to create a brilliant design while meeting the state, county, local codes, zoning, approval, and meeting historic preservation. These are not just one-time hurdles, but analyzed through the design and construction process to make sure that they are met as effectively as possible and agreed upon in the contract documents. The IHDA, Illinois Housing Development Authority, heavily scrutinizes these projects during design and after occupancy to make sure the developer and residents follow best practices in respect to risk management, quality of construction, quality of finishes, quality of management, and I believe you are in very good and trustworthy hands if you approve this project. It will be heavily scrutinized. I've looked at the plans and elevations. I find the floor plans and elevations they've created nice spaces and accommodating to the residents. The two-story loft-style living in many of the units is very contemporary and fun. I suspect that the developer's views of historic preservation guidelines is that it is an interesting challenge and that his team is working hard to orchestrate many aspects of this project for the betterment of all. As we all know, few people and companies are worthy to take on this challenge. The real challenge in my mind for this project is to develop a holistic neighborhood that adds value to Batavia and Geneva communities. Evergreen Development has the experience and track record that illustrates that this is their ultimate expectation. So I believe that it is a reasonable expectation. I grew up in Batavia at Batavia High and believe that the diversity that I experienced at Batavia High made me a better person. I do believe that the affordable housing development will bring long-term economic development to our community in many forms, with working families, helping out our stores, helpful jobs, and buying future homes as they transition out of the Campana development. This project is a win for our communities, a win for our residents, and a win for historic preservation. Thank you.
Thank you. Before the next speaker comes up, I think this was the completion of the list from the previous meeting.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask Emily Erickson, was Jim at the previous meeting? Yes. Okay, then I'm going to allow you to speak now in light of the fact that he would have been able to speak at that meeting. Please don't repeat. I know you have a written statement, but please don't repeat
Believe it or
like
not,
to
there's nothing repeated here, I promise.
Thank you.
Okay, my husband's topic has to do with property needs assessment. So Evergreen has painted a picture that the state of the Campana building is in such need of restoration that if they don't come in and develop it, the building will crumble and sadly be lost as a historic site forever. In fact, the exact quote found within Evergreen's narrative discussing LaSalle factors is as follows. Without investment, the Campana building will eventually fall into disrepair and will no longer be a beacon for the city of Batavia. This redevelopment will ensure that it is a flagship building into the future. I wanted to study the Campana building and figure out what repairs were needed to determine if it was really crumbling. Evergreen has hired a private architecture and design firm called Number 9 Design LLC to do what's called a property needs assessment. This is just like an inspection for your home, for a prospective home, and it's also required when applying for low-income housing tax credits. It's important to explain that each area or item inspected in the evaluation is given a category, and they fall into 5 major categories: good, fair, poor, and then the 2 that fall in between, good to fair and fair to poor. Upon dissecting and analyzing this property needs assessment, I focused on only categories that have to do with the building structure, interior and exterior, and not items that are a result of building apartments within. I was a little more than shocked to find that approximately 77%, about 34 of those line items, fall into the fair to good condition category. In fact, the report listed only 2 items that were in poor condition. Again, 77% of the items listed regarding structure, interior, and exterior were found to be in fair to good condition. Side note, those 2 items to be in poor condition with significant work required were wood windows and an original wood door. I'd just like to state, too, that the definition of fair to good is defined as average to above average condition with some work required, primarily due to normal age and wear. But wait, I thought the building was crumbling. The P&A's observation of Campana's roofing states that it is in good to fair condition with no active leaks identified and not in need of repair. Yet Evergreen is still projected to spend funding dollars close to $1 million worth on new roofing. Now, there's no doubt that the Campana building needs a lot of TLC. Anyone can see that. And a few of the items found in fair to poor condition were structural and historical elements like the masonry in need of tuck pointing and a replacement of the original glass block. The estimates for those restoration items seem to be approximately $2 million based on the P&A. But I wondered why those aren't repairs that the current owner might undertake or any other potential owner couldn't undertake as well. I wonder why Frank Mears hasn't done these restoration efforts himself. Since Evergreen has applied for a historical tax credit through the federal government of $3.75 million to fund these structural repairs, could Frank Mears LLC do this as well? So on Monday night, my wife asked Anthony Rubano from the Historic Preservation Office if that $3.7 million historical tax credit could be petitioned for by the current owners. You know what his answer was? Yes. His answer was yes. In fact, he looked at my wife and said, "You could apply for the tax credits for the building as long as the current owner gave his blessing." So there you have it. Evergreen is not Campana's sole savior. The "if not us, then who" narrative that David Block keeps emphasizing could come in the form of the current owner, maybe a group of concerned citizens, or maybe even the city of Batavia. I'm afraid that if we fall under this urgent spell for Evergreen to restore Campana, that it might result in the transformation of a historic building into modern apartments, but at the price of the building's integrity. The other false narrative I'd like to address is the building's underutilization. It seems that Evergreen is using the strategy that if you state something enough times, it becomes truth. So let's talk occupancy. Currently, the Campana building is filled to about 60% occupancy rate. Not exactly where a landlord might want to be, but it's not a minority rating. But what's really the kicker to point out is that since the current owners have signed their exclusive sale agreement with Evergreen, they have had to decline 2 prospective tenants looking to rent space within Campana. One was an upscale bridal shop that wanted to rent the entire 3rd floor as a storage warehouse for dress inventory, and the second was a dance studio. Oh, and the current golf studio that's there, they also wanted to expand their space. So those additional tenants would have pushed the occupancy rate to over 80%. Now, that's not what I would call underutilized in my book. So who's to blame for this underutilization? I'll let you be the judge.
Thank you.
Okay, going on to the next list of people, we have Samantha Mix and then Pam Bellum. Which one? Samantha Mix, then?
I'm Samantha. Good evening, I'm Samantha Mix. I live at 714 Latham Street, and my kids are rising stars in the Batavia Public School System. Thank you very much. Betsy, thank you. Where's Betsy? Who spoke? Thank you very much for your opening comments, because I'm addressing that. First of all, they're not called Ever Nothing.
Could you address the commission?
Of course, I just don't my butt to everybody. Many people who need such housing is being proposed, which I think is needed. And Betsy, that's why I'm referencing Betsy. Louise White has a lot of kids who don't have what they need. Their parents, if they have two parents or a parent and grandmother, work many, many jobs. They can't get to them. They share cars, etc. Many people who need such housing, they have one job, sometimes more than one job, sometimes no jobs. Many of them don't have cars, or they have an unreliable car, or they share a car with somebody else. So the problem that happens with a lot of people in this situation is they've got kids. What do you do with the kids when there's a day off school and you've got to go to work? What do you do when there's a half day? What do you do when it's holiday in summer? You got to put them somewhere. One of the biggest barriers to people who are struggling to get ahead is childcare costs. And we struggle with that. A two-income family, we struggled for a long time with what do we do with it? How do we pay for childcare? We're making a decent living, it's expensive to get quality childcare. So I would like to know if, I'm hoping there is an altruistic spirit somewhere in proposing a mixed-use development that included housing for low-income families or other individuals who will have kids. That's why there's a tot lot proposed, right? In the spirit of the altruism that I hope drove this concept, I expect an on-site daycare. I expect a requirement for an on-site daycare to help lift these citizens in need and help them not just stay in this housing. Oh, someone's paying the rent, I'm making, $6 now at Walmart. That's not right. They need to be lifted. Something needs to be lifted is their quality of daycare. There needs to be a daycare on site with quality care so these people who, again, have sometimes very limited, troubling transportation issues can just go home, pick up their kids, down the hallway in effect, and go on with their lives and not spend another hour after work getting through traffic and trying to pay the bills and pay for childcare, wondering where their kid is. They need to have something local. And I don't mean across Fabian Avenue or across 31. I mean like right there. It's a real problem, even for people of means, to afford childcare and then drive around after 8 or 9 hours at work and go pick them up and know the car breaks down, etc. Okay? That's a reality of people who will have these apartments, which are needed. But that's a reality you have to think about. It's the human element, the day-to-day element these people live with going, got a great place. No childcare. And the struggle continues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Sandra Ellis. And then after that is Josh Bailey Green.
Sandra Ellis, 40 South Lincoln, Geneva, Illinois. I want to thank you for hosting this difficult sessions that you've been doing. I've been to all of them. I wasn't prepared to speak early on because I wanted to listen to so many people and the issues keep coming and the variances keep coming. My statement will take 3 minutes. Does 3 wrongs make a right? First of all, it's wrong to proceed when the dangerous intersection issue has not been addressed. In 2008, my mother had an accident at the intersection of 31 and Fabian that totaled her car. I don't need to tell you that she was traveling east on Fabian, negotiating a left turn on 31, and hit by a car coming west on Fabian around that deadly curve. We've heard several times during these enlightening meetings about how this is one of the most dangerous intersections in Kane County. That was known 9 years ago. Nothing's been changed or fixed in this terrible intersection. IDOT and KDOT are still moaning about lack of funds, jurisdictional issues. Nothing's been done. Should some of the blame fall on the city of Batavia and its citizens for not being attentive? Compare the inability of government to address public safety issues to what happened in the last 2 years when some Geneva citizens pooled several $1,000s of their own money to have a study done to slenderize Route 31 between the Kane County Government Center and Fabian. It resulted in a congested, unsafe 4-lane street being slimmed down to a 3-lane street with easy and safe turn lanes. These citizens did this by working with IDOT, staying focused on solutions, and not allowing the government entity to pass the buck or simply put the project in limbo. Wherever the blame falls, the intersection needs to be fixed before any project of any kind proceeds. If $20 million in tax dollars is available to fund 2/3 of the cost of this 80-unit facility, then why can't Batavia's citizens and its council be as clever and fund and fix a dangerous intersection? That's wrong. Second, it's wrong to expect exorbitant investment costs for a feel-good preservation project to be predominantly funded by taxpayers. We all appreciate and value preservation, but cost matters. Isn't there a reasonable limit to just what doesn't make sense? Campana wasn't just a nostalgic hand lotion factory. In the spirit of transparency and true historic preservation, developers and preservationists seem to be ashamed to share that for several years in the 60s, it's where Percet tampons were made and sold. The product was unique in that it was marketed to young women and teens. For over half its life, Campana was a factory. For the past 20 years, not one feasible plan has been put forward to repair or restore the structure and to utilize it for commercial, retail, or academic purposes. Are we expecting taxpayers to underwrite a building that no buyer has felt worthwhile to invest their own funds in? Without historic preservation designation, this building would not have been underutilized and experienced considerable, and that's questionable, deterioration. It's prime real estate in an entry corridor. Are we willing to spend $375,000 per unit? My simple math is 30 million divided by 80 units, and the ongoing taxpayer investment in the form of subsidized rents and unfunded Geneva School District costs to preserve a building that has no appeal to business investors. The property is valuable. It could have great commercial appeal if the owner and buyer are not burdened with historic preservation regulations. Many years of disinterest in this property should be reason enough for Batavia to revisit why they're burdening a property owner to preserve a building when for 20 years no one has shown interest. If no buyer feels this is a good investment, then why is it a good deal for taxpayers? Third and last, it's wrong because those most impacted by this decision have no vote. We should apply a simple standard of fairness. If the project moves forward as proposed, residents of Batavia have nothing to lose. Their share of taxes will fund fire, emergency, and related city services. Residents of Geneva had considerably more to lose. They'll be funding a significant shortfall in school district, library, and park district costs. The projected taxes on this completed project will not come close to covering the entire cost, extra cost to Geneva residents, yet the residents have no vote. So let's apply the standard of fairness. If the roles were reversed and residents were willing to include the Campana, and Batavia residents were willing to include the Campana property in their school, library, and park district, while Geneva agreed to provide the emergency and related city services, would this zoning board think that's fair? If the standard of fairness doesn't work, then how can Batavia proceed as a good neighbor with the project? It is wrong. This is the wrong facility and in the wrong location, and it's being wrongly underwritten by already overburdened taxpayers. 3 wrongs don't make a right.
Thank you. Please, no applause. Okay, so I guess I'm not being heard because I keep hearing traffic. And it's not that these aren't important issues, but we don't need the repetition because it just continues to make the meeting longer. Traffic, parking, stormwater, safety, taxes. Please be brief in your statements. Just say, I support these previously stated concerns. And that way we'll get through the meeting much more quickly and everyone will have an opportunity to be heard. So you're lucky because you're the first one after that statement.
All righty, here we go.
Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start cutting you off, and I don't like to do that. I don't like to cut people off because I think it's rude.
Yeah.
But again, in the spirit of being respectful to everybody here, we need to be brief. Thank you.
All right, I am Josh Bailey Green, and I am a resident of Batavia, and I'm also the associate pastor at Batavia United Methodist Church, which is a historic congregation, a historic building, also on the National Registry. So we've dealt with some of those issues as a congregation, and we know how big they can be. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Fox River Valley Initiative, which is a Kane County organization that's comprised of 14 faith, civic, and social service organizations representing nearly 35,000 residents of the Fox River Valley. I ask that the leaders of the Fox River Valley Initiative please stand at this time. So if you can count those heads and multiply that by 3 minutes, that's the time we want to save you now. And so we're here in support of this project.
I think get away with it.
We, the members of the Fox River Valley Initiative, know that there is a significant need for affordable working family housing in Batavia. We recognizing that Batavia has taken seriously the need for such housing, we still see that a serious shortage exists, and so we continue to affirm that attention to that is important. Especially based on the tone of the news in recent days, we think that demonstrating and embodying hospitality is a really important thing in our communities. So we implore our town and our community to consider that. We, as the members of the Fox River Valley Initiative, know also that the people of this area value the Campana building for its historical importance and its unique architecture. The historical landmark has fallen into disrepair and underutilization. I think the test of the decades now have demonstrated that. Our member institutions value honoring our history as well as adapting to current needs. The metaphor I'm thinking of is there's an eclipse coming on Monday. We know that when the window is there for that, we want to catch that opportunity. This is the eclipse coming for the Campana building, and we don't want this opportunity to go by. The Fox River Valley Initiative knows there's been a lot of discussion about the areas pertinent to the Planning Commission, traffic, parking, the impact on schools. Evergreen has worked really hard to come up with reasonable solutions to these things. It's time for our discussion to come to a close as quickly as possible so that you, the Planning Commission, can do your discernment and make a positive recommendation to the City Council to move this development forward for completion. The Fox River Valley institutions have been here for a long time, and they're not going anywhere anytime soon. We're going to be here to work with everyone associated with this project to make sure that once it's completed, any concerns that arise are addressed. We're not afraid of the ramifications of this building. We believe that it's a really hopeful and a beautiful thing for our community. And thank you for your time.
Great, thank you.
Next is Guy Prisco, and then skipping over those that have already spoken, Alicia Hurt.
This guy talked last time, didn't he? He looks very familiar.
Thank you very much. My name is Guy Prisco. My wife and I reside at the Homestead Retirement Community at 700 West Fabian Parkway in Batavia. The subject of the proposed Campana project has been much discussed by residents of our Homestead community, and several fellow residents have encouraged me to speak to you about some of the concerns discussed. To be clear, my remarks are mine and do not in any way represent the Homestead in any official way. A paramount concern can be summed up by a simple question. Why was a housing project ever proposed for the Campana building? Surely, viewing the building from the east and the south, and keeping in mind historic preservation restrictions and the restrictions imposed by the design and construction of the building itself, would allow even a casual observer to conclude that such a building could never be suitable for human habitation. Although it is understood that anyone who legally controls a piece of property has the right to petition governmental authorities to change ordinances and codes to allow proposed uses, the requested changes in the proposal do not result in livable housing units. For example, the proposed installation of horizontal windows below the sill line at first floor level to comply with transparency requirements and an entire exterior wall of glass block is an affront to any tenant, particularly to low-income tenants. Just imagine, how would you like living in such a unit? Likewise, on the building's west side, even though narrow windows are inserted in the glass block panels, this does little to improve livability when many other issues concerning livability are considered. Although there is minimal detailed information provided at this time regarding the living accommodations, based on the limited information provided, it appears clear that most of the units will be windowless with 16-foot-high ceilings and interior bedrooms with a loft space over some of the bedrooms. Also, the long corridor serving the units on the first floor includes a line of structural columns down the middle of the corridor that creates a regimented institutional environmental look. Many other concerns in this regard could be mentioned, but it seems clear that such living accommodations are not suitable for human habitation and give the appearance of warehousing people. In regard to affordable housing, it appears that there is much support for such housing. The consensus seems to be that if our tax money is to be used for affordable housing, such housing should be dignified housing that is located in areas that provide the amenities and public services in any residential area and not a vehicle to fund an historic renovation project. In regard to historic preservation, most people seem to believe that the Campana building is a landmark that should be preserved, if feasibly possible. However, many believe that the west and south views are very unsightly and detract from the main structure and wonder why the historic preservation rules seem to apply only to the front of the building. In this connection, it appears that rules, approvals, and general administration of historic preservation is primarily controlled by bureaucracies in Washington and Springfield who approve changes over the heads of local officials. In fact, serious questions have been raised about some of the changes to the Campana building over the past many years. Most comments I have heard are supportive of preserving the Campana building. However, some believe if the owners cannot find suitable tenants, and that if the building cannot be properly maintained, then demolition of the property should be considered, and this singular property developed in a manner worthy of its uniqueness. However, it is the hope of most that the developer and owners of the Campana building will seek another appropriate tenant or tenants that will make it financially feasible to adaptively reuse and preserve the building. In closing, I would paraphrase and consolidate comments heard in many discussions that seems to sum up a consensus of feelings about the proposed project. It doesn't make sense for housing. And if Phil Elfstrom of the 70s and 80s were still here, still with us, he would make something good happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Alicia Hurt and then Patty Lackman.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Alicia Hurt. I'm a resident of Batavia. I live at 412 Locust Street, and I moved to this community 3 years ago when I accepted a position at Mutual Ground. As a young professional, I can personally testify to how difficult it can be to find affordable housing in this area. And I just want to say that I am highly invested in the safety of both the new residents and continued current residents of the communities that we live in. So I appreciate the work that all parties are involved in doing to make sure that this process and this proposal is planned in the most effective manner. I went home after the last meeting and spoke with my sister who lives in Atlanta. She works for the community development branch of the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank, and in speaking with her and doing my own research on the topic, I have found that there's a lot of evidence that indicates numerous benefits a project such as this can offer our communities. I'll try and consolidate the statement that I was going to make to make sure that I'm as brief as possible. One thing that I did want to highlight is that there are different studies such as the higher density development myth and fact sheet that you can look up online that gives you information about the benefits that can come out of increasing our higher density developments and not just only having single family home residents or neighborhoods built into our communities. So that's something that I think addresses a lot of the concerns that have been raised thus far in the different meetings. I think that what can come out of a program such as this, a proposal such as this, are things such as a growth to our local economy, such as drawing in people like myself and encouraging job growth. And that there's a lot of evidence also that there's going to not be so much concern around the parking when you consider the fact that mixed use does a really great job of having that balance of folks leaving and coming at somewhat different times. So that need is kind of taken care of as well. So just in kind of closing, I hope that you will consider carefully the proposal made by Evergreen, because I believe there are a number of benefits it could bring to our community. And I believe that at the end of the day, we are all invested in the prosperity of the Tri-City area. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Patty Lackman is next. And after that, Margaret Egan.
Good evening. I'm usually asking all you questions when it is a candidates forum, so just be ready for that if you're running for office in the near future. I'm Patty Lackman, and I am from the League of Women Voters of Central Kane County. I am Vice President and Voter Service Chair, and while we probably can't beat the Fox Valley Initiative, could the League members please stand up? And I'm going to have your and there is a little overlap here with the League and the Fox Valley Initiative. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that advocates for government issues and programs that confirms the League's commitment to diversity, pluralism, and inclusion. One of these issues is affordable housing. The League supports governmental and community efforts to ensure affordable, safe, and decent housing for the citizens of the communities of Central Kane County, including Batavia, Geneva, and St. Charles. The proposal by Evergreen Real Estate Group for the Campana building achieves this objective by including affordable rental units in 80% of the Campana redevelopment project. Approval of this project will help our communities meet the critical housing needs of our low-wage earning working citizens. In addition, approval of this project will preserve a Kane County historical jewel. Out of the fear of the affordable housing component of the proposal, opponents are advocating for something better to be done to this property, but no one has proposed a workable use of this property for over 40 years. The League believes that the proposal presented by Evergreen is our community's last best chance to save a building worth saving, while providing affordable housing to citizens who deserve the opportunity to live in the communities in which they work. For these reasons, the League of Women Voters of Central Kane County supports Evergreen's proposed redevelopment of the Campana building and encourages the City of Batavia to approve this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Margaret Egan, and then after that, Alexander Romanoff.
Good evening. My name is Margaret Egan. I am Assistant Director for Preservation Partners of the Fox Valley. I'd like to read a letter tonight on behalf of the entire Board of Preservation Partners. I would like you to know that the members of the board all live in the Tri-City area. The City of Batavia faces unique challenges with the Campana property. The Campana building is a white elephant. It is also an iconic landmark, a beacon on the Illinois prairie, which is deeply appreciated by many in our region and far beyond. The challenge facing us today is approving an appropriate use for the building that will allow its owners to fully utilize the site and will accomplish a comprehensive restoration of the beloved landmark, preserving its integrity for decades to come. A brief history. Staff of Preservation Partners have monitored development proposals for over 2 decades. Three of these stand down. One, a proposal to build Dryer Clinic in front to the north with a strip of retail on the bottom floor of Campana, including large picture windows for each store. 2, move the entire structure forward on property to allow large townhouse development to the rear. 3, rent out a large portion of the building to a Chicago charter school. None of these proposals advanced to be reviewed by city staff and officials. Most important, none of these proposals would have restored the building, repairing its unique features such as glass block windows, ceramic tile, and concrete infrastructure. We have in front of us tonight a project that will accomplish the goals we have outlined, a proposal that has met the rigorous approval of the State Historic Preservation Agency, qualifying it for federal historic tax credits. Preservation Partners strongly supports the proposed use of the site for mixed income housing. However, our focus tonight is the future of the building. We are well aware that you appreciate the profound significance of the structure since Batavia designated it as a local landmark. We simply want to add our voices to the chorus of supporters who view the Evergreen proposal as a remarkable opportunity. We implore you to take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alexander Romanoff, and then Philip.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Alexander Romanov, and I live at the cross of Western and Allen Drive. So I work at Fermilab, the other historical place, I think, here in the Batavia. And as a scientist, I always do calculations and sanity checks for everything that kind of can have that. And the project of the Campana has some numbers that we can operate with. So, for example, the cost of $30 million for 80 apartments is $375,000 per one apartment. It is twice the price that I paid for my house, and or my house plus 30 years of taxes. So I would say that it is a very inefficient way to spend money to build an affordable housing. And also it is not very appropriate place, as many mentioned before. So second thing that I want to mention regarding the numbers, 16 feet of glass block walls looking on the street are basically a hole in terms of insulation. So the typical glass block has R2 rating, while walls has R15 if they are old, and probably the current codes imply even stricter requirements for the insulation. A good window gives about R5, which means that basically putting poor people in those apartments will they will have to pay a lot to live in those apartments in utility bills, both in summer and in the winter. In the winter especially, because high ceilings, the all warm air will go upwards and you will need to heat it up really intensive. So the second point is that the whole apartment building will have only 30 kids. It's very suspicious estimation. I have 2 kids, and one of the first lessons that I learned in this country is that having kids is very expensive. So that means that if you don't have kids, you are probably have less chances to have a hard financial situation. So I would say that my estimation may be wrong, is that it would be approximately 1 kid per apartment. And we saw actually the typical family on the first meeting. There was a single mom with 2 kids or something, if I'm right. Second, the traffic analysis looks suspicious. I won't cover I won't repeat, but I haven't seen the the analysis of pedestrian traffic across the crossroad, which probably would be intense, especially during rush hours. Imagine a person pressing the button and the one road is blocked for a minute instead of 30 seconds or whatever it is. Then bus traffic probably will be increased, and the buses will be stopped at the bus stops and will block half of the road, which also will create a significant obstruction for the traffic. And I personally think that the estimation for the car trips per day for the whole apartment building is underestimated. So as a conclusion, I would like to say that I have been grown in an affordable house that was provided by the government. And I think that it is great, but it's really inefficient way and to provide affordable housing. And I think that those people who are waiting for these apartments should be first in line to ban this project and to spend that $30 million in efficient way and create maybe even bigger number of affordable apartments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Philip M. Drimple or something, Homestead. Sorry, I couldn't read the last name. I apologize if I'm mangling it. Philip from Homestead. Robin Schroeder. One of you, Robin Schroeder? And then after that, Ruth Bastian.
Hi, good evening. My name is my name is Robin Schroeder. I live at 1764 Eagle Brook Drive in Geneva. I have 2, one's a comment and then another is a series of questions. My comment is about the Historical Preservation Board meeting, the commission meeting that happened on Monday. I was really interested to see that Evergreen showed up without an elevation. So I served on an architectural committee for 5 years. We would not have heard a potential plan without an elevation. So the Preservation Board has no say on the inside of the building, only the outside. And so for a prospective entity to show up without an elevation is kind of weird. And then to have that prospective person very actively seem very agitated when their plan wasn't accepted initially was even weirder to see. So I thought that was just weird. I wanted to get it a little bit out in the open because totally not acceptable. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is the letter that was inside of the agenda from the school district board from Geneva. There's a copy of it inside the agenda for this meeting. Basically, staff commented that the letter was that the Geneva 304 welcomed all new residents to the school district and is happily serve all students within the defined boundaries. However, the rest of the letter goes on to outline 4 different concerns that they had that I don't think have been addressed. So it would be really useful, I think, to go through them, and I'd like to know if Evergreen has replied to those at all. The first one has to do with a sidewalk between Campana and Allen Drive. The other one has to do with buses being able to turn around inside of those parking lots, so Geneva was concerned about that. They were also concerned about a $25,000 impact fee to help with technology improvements and faculty. And then the 4th item was to determine the impact of the project on the other property taxpayers in Geneva 304. So obviously this is a hard thing to do because the property needs to be reassessed after the property has been improved, but also because of the issues in Springfield around the disbursement of funding for different school districts in the state. But I'd like to see that Evergreen address these, since the city of Geneva, and to my knowledge, no other entity within Geneva has any ability to have any say on this project whatsoever, but yet that municipality is responsible for a lot of what the use that Campana will take up in the community. So I'd really like to see that addressed, and I'm kind of sad that it hasn't been brought up yet. So the letter was sent on July 31st also. So it's been 2 weeks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Ruth Bastian, and then Ed Lowry, sorry.
Hello, my name is Ruth Bastian, and I live in Allendale also. I just have a few quick questions. I won't go over my whole list. I'd like to ask a couple of questions about transporting children from this proposed usage to Western Avenue School. I think it's going to be done by van at this point. What if children miss the van? What if somebody decides that they don't want to ride the van? How are they going to get to school? And is there a plan in this program that addresses maybe before school and after school activities? How are the kids going to get to and from school that way? Also, we've talked about the parking and whether variances and no variances, and if the variances are granted in all the parking that we think, due to code, doesn't get built at the beginning, what triggers that being added? Will it have to be parking over at Fabian? Is it going to be parking on Allendale streets? What will trigger that, and how long will that take to fix? And those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
After Ed would be Stephen Cooper.
I'm Ed Lowry, and I have about half a dozen properties in Batavia. That's my interest. I actually live in Warrenville. That's a suburb of Batavia over there. And I agree with a lot of people. It seems like the building does not look like it's suitable for, and there's a lot of problems with its suitability for residential. I agree with the man that said the square peg and round hole. It seems like if you look at it from the front, it looks like the next great tech startup, which would be great with the jobs and all, if that were to ever happen. I also agree with the lady as far as the daycare center. That's a totally awesome idea. If you go through this project, to have a daycare center, so that working families, that maybe single parents or people that have to work 2 jobs, are able to have some place for their young children to be taken care of right on site. Makes it a lot easier for them. My main concern around this, I have a history of investing in the western suburbs. I have properties in Naperville, West Chicago, Warrenville, of course, and Aurora, Wheaton, some other places too. But I've been watching over the past 30 years, just basically trying to get a real feel for where things are going. And I really like Batavia. My daughter lives here. She loves Batavia. You guys have done a great job with the Riverwalk. Things are really, on an upswing. So I commend you for that. The other thing is that I find concerning is when I talk to friends that I have in real estate, and I'm like, well, how's this going to impact property values, taxes, things like that? Real estate professionals, nobody has said it's going to be good. They all say it's going to be bad. So it's going to put downward pressure on real estate values in Geneva and in Batavia. And of course, the tax impact for Geneva, they should be concerned about that. I agree with the lady that there should be some relief for people if their property taxes tend to go up. And that's pretty much it. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. And I do appreciate that you simply stated you agreed with others. That's exactly what we want for those who are coming forward.
Next, we have Stephen Cooper, and then after that, we have Jeff Wilson.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, I'm Stephen Cooper, an attorney from Geneva, practicing with the law firm of Cooper, Storm, and Piscopo. I'm here tonight representing Joseph Kiefer and his wife Samantha, residents of Allendale, who have objections, and their objections include all of the things you've heard from the objectors tonight. I don't intend to repeat any of those. I want to thank the staff and the Commission for accepting the letter that I wrote to alert the village of what we perceive to be a significant legal issue in the use of a planned development overlay with this process. I don't intend to debate nor to subject any of you or the people here to a debate over who's right about legal issues. I clearly disagree with your staff, and I suggest there are other times and other places where that issue is better addressed. I hope it doesn't have to be. When we first were contacted by the Kiefers, we obviously looked at the existing zoning and we looked at the proposed zoning. And we quickly learned what the staff has acknowledged tonight. The existing zoning will permit all of the uses that Evergreen wants to put upon this property. Now, we all know that traditionally zoning classifications regulate uses within specific zones, single-family homes, multifamily, commercial, but PUDs are intended to allow a mix of uses, and they do that under certain circumstances in order to create an environment that's beneficial to the community. They are not intended to deal with specific aspects of specific buildings, nor are they intended to allow a developer to avoid using the normal processes to obtain what they call deviations, and what we all know are actually variations in seeking concessions from the city. We identified two specific opportunities that the use of the overlay will provide to Evergreen. The first is, as I mentioned, the avoidance of the need to go through the variance process. They've asked for, they term them deviations, to parking, to retail percentages on street frontages, to signage, to cell towers. Those are not deviations, they're variations. There's a separate procedure in the Batavia Code for seeking variations, and that is to go before the Zoning Board of Appeals and present evidence to satisfy a specific statutory set of requirements. Anybody who's done zoning and gone with a client to a Zoning Board of Appeals hearing on a variation knows that the principal hurdle is to show a hardship. You can only show a hardship if you have not created the hardship yourself. An example of that would be if you bought a single-family lot and you build a house from lot line to lot line or building line to building line, and then you thought, gee, I forgot to include a garage. So I'm going to go and get a variation because it would help me economically. I don't think it would hurt my neighbors. And you would hear from a plan commission, you may have a hardship, but it's self-created. Now, why is that relevant to the Evergreen proposal? They are not asking, and they don't want to go through that process because undoubtedly some, if not all, of the variations they are requesting would be denied because they're self-created. When you buy a piece of property and you know restrictions, you know they exist, and you go ahead and buy them, you're not eligible for a variation. You have created the hardship on yourself. What they propose is that you give them a pass on proving those elements that are required for variations. And the only reason that we could come up with for doing that was because they want economic concessions. They don't want them to advance the city's interest, the health, safety, and welfare of residents, property values of residents. They want not to have to pay for a parking lot. They want the revenue from a cell tower. They don't want to be restricted in their signage. I don't see any reason to give those to them without requiring them to go through the legal process. The second reason that I think they want them is that they want to subdivide this building into specific lots. They want to separate the residential and have individual commercial lots. And I believe they said at the first hearing they want to do that because they need the cash flow from those commercial properties to support the project. And that says to me that without that cash flow, the housing alone would not be viable. And I suggest to you that by doing that, if you let them subdivide that, you will give them the right at some point in the future, or some successor of Evergreen, to decide that we've gotten our tax credits, we've made our money, we've done well, we're going to go on to greener pastures. But before we go, we're going to sell off the valuable commercial lots in that building, which they would have every right to do if you subdivide it. And who's going to be left holding the bag? Some bank with a foreclosure? Are you going to have an empty building because the residential units were not self-supporting? I say this because everybody has said the purpose of the proponents of this development, and many of us agree with the purpose, and that is to save a historic and a culturally significant building. I think most people here would agree with that. It's entirely possible, it's feasible, that if you subdivide those lots and they do sell them off, you will be defeating the very purpose that everyone thinks benefits from this project. It may not. That may not happen, but it well could. We all know that for-profit enterprises do what they do for profit, and this could well happen down the road. I want to say one other thing about parking from a different perspective. They've proposed to land bank land for future parking if it becomes necessary. Have you considered who's going to determine whether it's necessary or not, when that's going to be done, and what that's going to cost? What I haven't heard from the staff or the plans is that Evergreen has offered to provide the city with a durable letter of credit to cover those costs, to pay the costs that the citizens of Batavia will otherwise have to pay if additional parking is needed and Evergreen or a successor is no longer in the picture. No bank in a foreclosure action is going to pay it. The citizens of Batavia are going to pay it. Now is the time to insist on getting the parking that may be needed. We've heard Mayor Shelkey say that too often in this city, and indeed in every city in the valley that I know of, the existing parking requirements are often inadequate for the parking that is required by a particular development. It just doesn't make any sense to push that can down the road. You cannot determine presently what the drainage requirements on an impervious surface of additional parking will be. But what we do know is that the gentleman who spoke at the last meeting, Mr. Burns, who's a partner in the ownership of the building directly north of Campana, says that the drainage will flow through their property. You can't figure out what that's going to be or the cost of it until you engineer it. Why not simply insist that the parking be provided as required by your ordinance? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next person is Jeff Wilson, and then Gunther Lubin.
So before you speak, we have five more on our list.
Yes.
So I was going to stop at some point and allow the applicant to speak, but I think I'd like if we can move it along, get through the five, so that the public has spoken for the first time all through, and then we'll have the applicant respond.
Thank you. My name is Jeffrey Wilson. I live in Geneva. I've been on the Plan Commission. I've been on the City Council, and so I understand the previous comments addressed to you regarding your unique responsibilities as members of a Plan Commission. And while I understand why staff makes a recommendation to you, I know that you understand that you are in no way bound by that recommendation. You have to reach individual determinations on an enormously complex set of issues that have been presented here. I think that there is good reason, if I were in your seats, to vote no. But regardless of how you vote, if you do vote no, that doesn't kill the project. So the urgency of this meeting can be somewhat buffered by the fact that it would go then to City Council. And if you deny it, it doesn't end the process. It puts the process in the hands of elected officials who can be held accountable by the voters of this community. Ultimately, I hope that's where this decision ends up, so that there be clear accountability of elected officials on this. So I would encourage you to deny it. It would create a situation, I believe, where the council then has to pass it by a supermajority. And given the complexity of this issue, that's exactly where this should be resolved. Hands of elected officials on a supermajority. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
After that is Beth Hunter, Gunther, and then Beth Hunter.
Awesome. Here, I'm going to give you guys some materials you guys can have. There should be, hopefully, I did 15. I don't know if there are enough for 15. Gunther Lubin from Geneva, Illinois. Thank you for allowing us to speak to you about this project. I'm not here to criticize or comment on affordable housing. I think we all agree affordable housing is needed in this area. I'm not here to question Evergreen. I think they're a very legitimate developer of projects. I am from the real estate development industry. I've built affordable housing. I've built LIHTC projects. I have built industrial projects. I've built commercial projects. I just briefly want to go over some concerns I have on this project, looking at it at a high level, concerns. In general, when I look at a cross-jurisdictional project like this, it's concerning that we look at what the tax burden, what are we putting on the other taxpayers here in Geneva on this project? So I ran some numbers in this report for you. When the developer talked about the taxes being, I think, $100,000 right now, or $96,000 right now, of that amount, roughly $68,000 is currently going to Geneva School District. If the taxes go up to $150,000 like they're forecasting, only about $104,000 will be going to Geneva School District. We've heard metrics all over from students being from 20 to 80 students. None of us really know at this point, but say if there's 40 or 50 students, is the additional $36,000 coming in? Because right now there's zero load on this property. There's no students coming into Geneva School District, and they're still getting $68,000 a year. So we're adding $36,000 a year. Is that going to cover the additional 40, 50 students? That's the concern. Geneva residents see this liability coming down the line here. Is it going to impact us? So I ran some numbers there in the report on just multi-tenant properties in Geneva And they're averaging about $3,500 to $3,600 per unit for taxes annually. The model they're using, if this is correct, there's about $1,300. So when I look at this model, it doesn't surprise me to see the Geneva numbers at $3,500. That's about 2 to 2.5 months worth of rent to pay for taxes. They're covering the taxes in less than 1 month. Something doesn't add up. So I would question the commission to ask this applicant to go to the township assessor, maybe can reconfirm their numbers that they're using the right number. I'm looking at things as a model, and I don't think they're plugging in 150 is correct. I think the taxes, when you look at the numbers I ran, you hear in this report, 300 to 320, maybe 340 would be a real estate tax model for this project, and so they're using much lower numbers. It's concerning. Dual ownership is another concern I have in this project. They're requesting dual ownership partially because their commercial income is exceeding 20% of gross revenue. By doing so, it's forcing them to go to a longer depreciation schedule. If they can pull off that 20% of income, keep it below 20%, which is what they're requesting to do, they can go to a faster acceleration schedule of 27.5 years. As citizens of Batavia, I would be concerned having dual ownership. I think you want a single ownership property to be able to speak to one property owner and not chasing several owners down to repair this property. And likely, the other big concern I have is the wireless communication. I think there's been discussion of giving relief and keeping the wireless towers in place. And I would argue that that relief is not granted, that this applicant needs to go and terminate the 2 leases that expire in 2028 and 2039. And that loss of revenue should bring them below their 20%, and they can probably keep single ownership and not have to subdivide this property. The next point I have is traffic, and I'll keep it light, but I will just mention it's some data I gave in there for you. I have a father of 4 kids, and my number 2 is a Fusion player. So I can tell you I know this property too well. From November to June, I go here 6 to 8 times a week. Too many times, but I know the property well. So my big concern is we have 52 teams basically based out of the back of that building. They practice from 4:30 to 9:30 every weeknight, Monday through Friday. I ran some numbers. I don't think the traffic data captured some of that traffic count. Obviously, their traffic, I think, ran from 2 to 5 p.m. I'm very concerned. At our pickup and drop-off times, you will see every parking space in the medical and the building around the back utilized temporarily for 20, 30, 40 minutes as we drop and pick up kids. It is a complete parking nightmare. Plus, we're seeing young student drivers at 15, young new drivers at 16, trying to make left-hand turns out of this property at the medical or at the entrance there by the mattress company. It is really concerning. You need to leverage this opportunity to try to get the improvements in with the right-in, right-outs, maybe a controlled intersection, a turn lane, whatever you can. It sounds like it's been going on too many years, that this is your opportunity to leverage, if this project moves forward, to capture these roadway improvements. The current applicant has only budgeted $123,000 in all improvements regarding roadway and sidewalk. That's nothing. That's really nothing. They've offered a token to give up some money for or give up some right-of-way. That's nothing. We as developers give up right-of-way all the time. It's token. It means nothing. There's no real value to it. To get the deal, we do it. So they arguing there's some value there. I don't see the value there. Lastly, I have concern regarding reserves. IDA will require them to carry some reserves when it comes to maintaining the property, or certainly for capital improvements or refrigerators, appliances, et cetera. This being historic property, I question whether the applicant, and maybe as a request from the commission, to go get a capital reserve study on what it would take to maintain this property. I'm not worried what the thing's going to be in 5 or 10 years, but in 20 or 30 years, are the funds going to be there to take care of this property? And would this applicant be willing to put funds in escrow to make sure this thing's maintained? Obviously, we have a property that has not been maintained or kept up to standards. And it seems like we could fall in that same trap if we're not maintaining this property. When you add all these extra costs, inadequate taxes, roadway improvements, reserves, I don't know where this project can float. And I'm not questioning whether this project's needed. I think we absolutely need this type of project in the area. It just doesn't fit at this location. It doesn't work here. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next is Beth Hunter and then John Rockwell.
So immediately following the applicant's comments? That's fine.
Then John Rockwell is next, and then we would have Ed Furmanis.
Should we come back to her?
Good evening. John Rockwell. I'm a resident of Geneva. I'd like to read a copy of a letter I wrote to the Batavia City Council earlier in July. And I feel it's important to share it with everyone as it expresses the viewpoints of many of local residents. Dear members, I just read the latest update from Mr. Isom with regard to the variances requested by the Evergreen Real Estate Group. Parking, landscaping, commercial ratios, and who knows what else. Seriously, what are they not requesting variances for? Zoning laws and city codes and ordinances are enacted to protect the citizens from numerous issues, most in the interest of safety to all. The mere fact that Evergreen needs all these variances to move forward with the development, in effect circumnavigating those laws just to get approval, in itself shows how incredibly flawed the project is. Furthermore, it also displays the undeniable fact that the Campana building and the associated property were never designed for this type of project and simply cannot support it, period. Parking variance, number of spaces required, 300. Number available, 146. That's less than half than what they need. And where does the overflow go? Without the proposed expansion, where are all those cars going to park? Nearby streets and neighborhoods? Homestead? Across the street, Fabian
Hey, John.
Park
With
Reserve?
all due respect, we've heard this many times, so just please state that you agree that there's a parking issue.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll leave it at the parking issue. The aforementioned issues, all are illegal, and most of them are downright dangerous. It appears that the only entity that will benefit from this project will be the Evergreen Group, mostly on the backs of taxpayers. Most of the studies that they've conducted are presented through their rose-colored glasses and have been submitted without being totally inclusive of all the facts. Traffic, noise, water runoff, radon, to mention a few. The studies they've submitted are incredibly subjective with regard to the facts available and paint the unrealistic picture that Evergreen wants to paint in order to garner approval. Common business practice, maybe. But in this case, there are way too many issues with regard to public safety that are being glossed over, and that is not acceptable. The truth is, and I'm sure many can agree, that if broken down study by study, the results and plans they've submitted are lacking in overall attention to detail, lacking in the representation of all the facts available, and are simply not a true depiction of the real impact the Campana project will have. Bottom line, the entire project is laden with safety hazards in every direction, and no one, prospective residents, neighbors, pedestrians using the streets of Fabian or Route 31 for travel, should be needlessly exposed to the effects of this dangerous development. And seriously, who would want to live there? It's a concrete dungeon with few usable windows and with serious limitations and restrictions in construction techniques. And that's even if they do get approval from the National Historic Register protections to defile this magnificent building. There are incredible traffic issues, both volume and noise, and let's not forget, as many have mentioned, the incredibly dangerous intersection. There's no local grocery, there's no park, there's no parking, there's poor pedestrian options, and too many people jammed in a building in a location that were never designed for it. Everybody needs a good, safe place to live. There's no denying that. But this building and this location are not the answer. There are plenty of other creative alternative options available for the use of this beautiful historic building. Commission, I believe your first duty and obligations are to represent the will of the majority of the people of this community, and you do a gross injustice to all those seeking a safe place to live, as well as to all those around the Campana property that will be so negatively impacted with this proposed development if you vote to approve this project. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we have Ed Furmanis.
Have a handout.
Everything I wanted to say tonight, well, I'm Ed Fermanis with MSM. I've been a tenant in the building for 17 years or so. Everything I wanted to mention is with regard to suitability, which wasn't in the list of the staff's bullet points. So I'm just going to briefly comment on the photos I just handed out. The first photo included in my handout is from Monday, July 28th, 2017, on a sunny evening at 7:40 p.m. in the west stairwell of the Campana building. Using an infrared thermometer, we took the shown reading at 120 degrees. The outside temperature at the time was 71 degrees, as seen in page 2 of the handout. Roughly 65 to 70% of the 16-foot-high exterior walls are composed of these glass blocks. The glamorized renderings of the units shown during the many Evergreen presentations have unrealistic views. A photo of the actual view from inside our second-floor facility is included as page 3. As you can plainly see, about the only determination that can be made to the glass blocks from inside the building is whether it's night or day. In my opinion, this combination of inefficiency, heat magnification, and poor visibility make the Campana building a horrible fit for low-income housing or humans in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think that's all of the speakers that signed up.
Sir, I signed up. Who? He has already spoken once.
You already had spoken at the last meeting?
No, sir. I switched with the traffic engineer, Javier.
Why don't you come forward then? I was going to take a 5-minute recess because I need a 5-minute recess.
I'm sorry, he did defer.
Okay. So after this last speaker, we'll take a 5-minute recess if that's acceptable. Is the commission okay with that?
Then it's going to be like 10.
Yeah, we really need to continue to move on, so we can get the developers' answers. Sorry.
I have some documents to hand out and a thumb drive to pass off to the gentleman up front, the most important guy in the room. Mr. Black, do you have an attorney in the room? Somebody that's representing you? Are you that? All right. That's for you. All right, my name is Joe Kiefer, 1740 Pheasant Run Place in Geneva. Thank you very much for having an open forum. I'm going to talk about something that nobody's talked about yet. I have questions in regards to Evergreen's application for LIHTC funds. This was a competitive process completed in the summer and fall of 2016. In fact, 25 developers competed for this money and submitted final applications. 12 developers were awarded it, which is up there. Evergreen was one of them. And one of the parts of Evergreen's application is what is called a Phase 1 environmental assessment, completed by Pioneer Engineering, addressed to David Block. Next slide, please. A big document in Evergreen's most recent submission of this document in April 2017. It's 300 pages. This was necessary in order for the Illinois Housing and Development Authority to determine which of the 25 developers would earn the tax credits. In Evergreen's case, approximately $2 million initially, bumped up to $3.6 million also in April of 2017 to build 16 more units that were found by their architects. Now, the Phase 1 evaluates certain factors called compliance factors as to whether the site is suitable after evaluating a number of environmental factors. And to complete the paperwork, there had to be an answer as to whether formal compliance steps or mitigation is required, a yes or no question, listed on the Phase 1 checklist. And at the conclusion of this document, Pioneer states no issues at all with Campana. I dispute this. Looking at what Evergreen submitted in July of 2016, they represented, for instance, the radon level in the county was 5.4. As such, no mitigation was necessary, despite the EPA guidelines requiring mitigation for any reading over 4. Did they do a radon test? It appears no. Pioneer just rolled with a county average and moved forward. Just that statement alone requires that no to be a yes. The IDA disagrees with me. IDA agrees with me. They are now requiring Evergreen to include radon mitigation systems in Campana. Why this wasn't represented in their initial application for LIHTC funds, I don't know. At what point, Evergreen's Phase 1 even states that the Campana property is located in a predominantly low-income and minority neighborhood. Is that a true statement? A statement that is clearly false. What is the point of including that statement in this document? I don't know. But I want to call your attention to a specific compliance factor titled Noise Abatement and Control, found on page 16. Pioneer represented the decibel level of the site is below 65 and thus does not require mitigation. Please then review attachment 9 within the EA. And sir, if you wouldn't mind forward. A few slides forward. Keep going, sir. Keep going. You can stop right there. Attachment 9 includes a copy of the HUD day-night noise level calculator results from Pioneer's vehicle data from around the site input into said calculator. Take a look at that page and what is missing. The data Pioneer input to reach the results of a decibel level below 65 decibels does not include any medium or heavy trucks that drive on Route 31 or Fabian Parkway. The data input only includes passenger vehicles. So according to Evergreen's experts, there are no trucks on the road. Of course, Fabian Parkway is a Class 2 truck route. And this document was submitted when Evergreen applied for these funds. No truck data. I could put a lawn chair at the intersection and tick off all the trucks that drive by, and they didn't even do that. Please refer to 24 CFR Part 51, Subpart B about noise abatement and control. Specifically, Section 51.103, that states a decibel level at 65 or below deems the site to be acceptable, as is represented on their Phase 1. A noise level between 65 and 75 is deemed typically unacceptable, with noise mitigation requirements being more if the decibel level is between 70 and 75. Next slide, sir. Keep going, please. That's good. A decibel level higher than 75 is deemed unacceptable, and according to page 4 of the HUD Noise Guidebook, a site that has an unacceptable rating would, as a rule, not be funded except under very limited circumstances. Given these parameters, if you input the identical information that Evergreen's experts include into this HUD calculator and also include just 10 heavy trucks, which the website defines as semis, driving on Fabian Parkway, the decibel level rises to 65.1. Right away, typically unacceptable. Anyone who lives around here knows that there are more than 10 heavy trucks driving on Fabian Parkway in a 24-hour period. And as luck would have it, there was a traffic study done by Kane County Department of Transportation back in September of 2015 that counted 898 heavy trucks on Fabian Parkway in a 24-hour period. Next slide. That's good. If you include 898 heavy trucks driving on Fabian Parkway, the decibel level for the Campana building reaches 73. Additionally, Pioneer's passenger vehicle data appears to be taken directly from another portion of Attachment 9, which is a printout from the Illinois Department of Transportation website showing vehicle traffic. If you visit IDOT's website, the numbers cited by Pioneer are found for vehicle traffic, but also found as an option to obtain truck data for the same Illinois roads. By choosing to select truck data, no truck data is found for Fabian Parkway, but truck data is found for Route 31. Again, no truck data whatsoever was included in Pioneer's calculation of noise pollution, even though some was available on the IDOT website. And how did this 2015 traffic study come around? My wife submitted a FOIA request to Kane County for communications related to this project, and it showed up. Now, I didn't see it sent to Pioneer, but I also didn't see them asking for it. Nonetheless, for their application for millions of dollars of taxpayer funds, no truck data was included. And the Phase 1 submitted showed the site doesn't need mitigation, that no formal compliance steps are required. I don't think that is representative of our community. I don't think people here, when faced with doing a thorough and accurate job and looking the other way, would look the other way. I included calculations giving Pioneer and Evergreen benefits of the doubt. I measured from the closest spot where someone is living in Campana initially, which is not consistent with HUD regulations. And I removed the measurement involving the stop sign at the intersection because the intersection is a stoplight. It's close, but still above 65. So even giving Evergreen and Pioneer the most amount of benefits of doubt, still a typically unacceptable site for noise pollution. Any way you cut it, this document was at best incomplete. If you review the additional sections within Part 51, Subpart B, specifically Section 51.104, next slide, sir. Keep going, please. Keep going, sir. That's good. You will see that HUD would conduct an individual review of the site should the decibel level be in the typically unacceptable range, and a whole host of possibilities and potentialities would then come into play once HUD starts reviewing the site. By not including accurate traffic information on their EA, Evergreen avoided this additional review and scrutiny by HUD that the law clearly states should happen. At the very least, the Phase 1 should reflect, yes, additional compliance factors or mitigation is required. Kind of takes away from the perfect no's it submitted with Evergreen's application, among the other inaccuracies. Basically stating Evergreen's proposal was just as good as the other proposals, not requiring a Phase 1 in the first place. According to IDA, only one other winner of these funds had to even do this calculation. And my understanding is that is because the other winner was also redeveloping a historic site, the Marshall Hotel in Chicago. It appears that the other 10 winners didn't even need to conduct this Phase 1 assessment. Remember, only half the developers who applied for these funds actually got the funds. So what of the losing developers? What would they say about this document? And now you know why I am against this project. The application should have invoked HUD review, or at least represented that HUD review would be necessary. And I submit to you this document represents behavior. And if they're going to behave this way, when they are asking for millions of dollars in federal funds, they're going to behave this way when they are asking things of you. I recommend you vote no on all requests for relief because this company has not displayed proper responsibility and motivation in developing a quality site, and these tax credits will go right back to IDA, put back in the pot, and given to another developer who applies for them, maybe to build something elsewhere in Batavia, Geneva, or Kane County, and maybe someone who will put windows in the bedrooms. So with that, I have the following questions. For the architects, how do you mitigate this property for sound when the historical restrictions are, as we found out Monday, very complicated and burdensome for the exterior of the property? And how do you mitigate this building for sound that is already constructed, has detailed historical restrictions on the interior as well, and is made of mostly glass? For David Block, did you intend to send these pages as shown on screen with your Phase 1 assessment in July of 2016? If so, state why you did not obtain and include truck counts. And what is the purpose of inaccurately describing the community surrounding the site? These are questions that I think would help determine the level of responsibility of this company and whether it is motivated enough to properly manage a building of up to 80 families. Last, and most importantly, I have the same questions as I do for David Block, for the author of this document, who appears to be either Boyd Raveling or Peter Decker. I request Evergreen to produce at their cost the author of this document here in front of this commission to answer my questions, as well as any further questions the commission or community may have. And I would submit to you that if you approve this project, you would be fostering a situation where developers could do and say and represent on key documents or otherwise whatever they wanted, whether it was true or not. And I don't think the city of Batavia wants that. With that, I yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, no applause. It just serves to delay the process. Please be respectful of all speakers and no applause. So we're done with the first round. If the commission wants to continue, we can continue.
That's
without a break.
You guys want to take a break?
You're up. Nope. Majority rules.
No, this is not it.
10, 15 minutes if we do. And look at the time.
Thank you.
They're all nice.
And then you just push a button. Good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for a marathon session. I'm David Block, Director of Development for Evergreen Real Estate Group. I'm going to take a little more than 3 minutes, but I'm going to try to be as respectful of your time and everybody else's time as I can to answer as many of the questions that we heard certainly last time. And I think many of the answers to the questions that were raised this evening are in what I'm going to present as well. I may not have 100% of the answers from what was raised tonight. Given that we're coming up on actually 9:30 now, we may, have to bring this out yet again, but we're prepared to do that. I want us to talk about 10 different topics, and actually I made a quick change to this agenda because we have one of our experts here who needs to leave, so I want to make a quick switch, but I want us to talk about these 10 topics. First, market concerns that were raised last time. The need for affordable housing here. I think we've heard a lot about that, mostly supportive of the need for affordable housing. Any hazardous materials or impacts of the wireless antenna facility at the site and the relief that we are requesting. Traffic issues, other site issues, drainage and civil engineering issues, the general location of the project and how it relates to the program that's being proposed. Some concepts about taxes and fiscal impact and property values we've heard a lot about. Property management and the questions that were raised about the properties that we own and manage in Elgin. And then some process and schedule questions, and then kind of a catch-all category, some details that were brought up, questions, and fundamental questions about our credibility, which I feel like we need to defend a little bit. Like I said, I switched the hazardous materials so that one of our consultants can speak. I do have some team members here, so with your permission, I will ask them to come and share some of that information as part of our overall response. First, I wanted to get specifically to some of the hazardous materials questions that were raised.
Questions about heating oil tanks. There were 2 tanks on the property that were removed in 1998. The good doctor last time raised questions about whether there's asbestos in the building. And the answer to that is there is no friable asbestos remaining in this building. Friable asbestos, you may know, is asbestos that is pipe wrap or other kinds of things that can flake off, and that's the most dangerous kind of asbestos. The building was 100% remediated for all friable asbestos about 15 years ago. There's a little bit of asbestos remaining, and I'll talk about this in a second, in the window caulking and in some of the glass block glazing areas, and that will be remediated according to all of the required standards. As Mr. Kiefer so carefully noted, we did do a Phase 1 environmental site assessment of this project in July of 2016. And as he also noted, there were no RECs, recognized environmental conditions, identified in connection with the subject property. And that is a term of art for the Phase 1 environmental assessment, which follows a national or international standard. We did a subsequent limited hazardous materials survey report in May of 2017, and we looked at a couple of the other issues that were brought up. This is an old building, and so there is some lead paint in it. There's lead paint from historic building materials. There's lead paint in the newer stairwells, the egress stairs, so there are painted rails and so forth, but the paint is not flaking, and so the paint can be encapsulated with new paint, and that is allowable under contemporary building codes. There's also lead in some of the original glazing, so there's actually lead that is essentially baked into the tile in that building. And that's not going anywhere because that is integral to the way the tiles are manufactured. I appreciate several people's concern about radon, and we share their concern. So we actually, as part of this 2017 survey, did specific radon tests, kind of like the test that you do when you sell your house. You got to put a little canister down, and 3 days later somebody comes and measures it. There is no radon in this building above the 4.0 threshold, okay? That is the agreed upon standard, and so we built upon the information that was in the earlier material about countywide averages, and we tested it at specific sites in the building, and we are below all of the thresholds required. And as I mentioned, there is some asbestos remaining that we will be remediating as part of our construction process. I wanted to ask Adam Kaufman, who is a cell phone and radio frequency expert, to come and just address a couple of concerns about the wireless antenna facility.
My name is Adam Kaufman. I work for a company called NTP Wireless. We are site acquisition and zoning consultants working on behalf of wireless carriers. In this capacity, I'm actually representing T-Mobile, who have an existing antenna facility on the roof of the Campana. As a demonstration of how ubiquitous wireless devices are, I always ask everybody here, how many people here, just by show of hands, is carrying their cell phone on them right now? You don't really even need to turn around. It's kind of a silly conversation. Nonetheless, the concern about health and safety, I share that concern. I don't think it's silly to ask the question, even if the commission, by federal law, can't rule on this issue. I like that the questions are asked, because if I'm doing this job for 20 years, I don't want to find out that what I'm doing is not good for people. If everyone here wants to take their phone and put it in the garbage, then I definitely don't need to discuss this any further. But given that we've decided these are an integral part of our lives, whether we like it or not, we have to accept the actual facts about what these devices are and how they are implemented into our lives. The American Cancer Society, the World Health Organization, the European Union, the FCC, there is the CDC, the FCC, have all conducted longitudinal studies on the safety of wireless antenna facilities. There is no evidence that there is any long-term negative health effects from wireless antenna facilities. In fact, the doctor referenced previously mentioned at the last meeting that there is a World Health Organization report that states that there is a carcinogenic effect from wireless antenna facilities. I actually will send to Scott the study he referenced. He actually referenced a study that is about your phone, not about the antenna facility. And it actually does not state in that report, which again, anybody can link to once the commission puts it out to the rest of the community, that study. In fact, the World Health Organization study Dr. Kiefer references says, over the past 15 years, studies examining a potential relationship between RF transmitters and cancer have been published. These studies have not provided evidence that RF exposure from the transmitters increases the risk of cancer. Likewise, long-term animal studies have not established an increased risk of cancer from exposure to RF fields, even at levels that are much higher than produced by base stations and wireless networks. That said, everybody should have the right to review the raw data, as Ms. Merluski, apologies if I butchered her name, mentioned at the mentioned at the last hearing, and that is why I'll be providing all of the raw data, including an health and safety study, which you're seeing an excerpt of above, that was conducted about this specific facility and whether or not it poses any danger or risk to potential future residents of the Campana or anybody in the area who lives near the Campana. If anyone has any questions after reviewing the materials from Scott, he'll have my contact information in the email. You are welcome to call me directly. I am very passionate about this subject, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the materials that are provided don't answer from anyone, regardless of whether or not they're on the commission or a member of the community. Thank you so much for your time.
And just for clarification, when we do receive that, we have a repository of documents that we post on our website that we will post it on there once we receive that.
Thanks very much, Adam. There we go. So next topic is the need for affordable housing and concerns about the market. I wanted to get to some fairly specific comments that came out. I went over this information last time, and so there's information previously about the Homes for a Changing Region report. There was one specific question raised, questioning actually one sentence in the Homes for a Changing Region report. I'll read you that passage in the middle there. From an affordability point of view, Batavia's rental market is reasonably well balanced for the great majority of families whose incomes are above $50,000. There's more than adequate supply of rental housing for residents earning between $35,000 and $50,000. There are shortages of affordable units for families whose annual incomes are under $35,000. These families are likely living in somewhat more expensive units and paying more than 30% of their incomes on housing and housing-related costs. And the specific question that was raised was about that sentence in the middle that says there is a more than adequate supply of rental housing for residents earning between $35,000 and $50,000. I just wanted to point out about the Homes for a Changing Region report that it was completed in the summer of 2014, and it was adopted by the City of Batavia Council in fall of 2014. Most of the data from the Homes for a Changing Region report is from the 2007 to 2011 American Community Survey from the U.S. Census Bureau. So if you look at the graph on the right side of the slide there, this is from Crain's Chicago Business, about the occupancy rate and the rents, you'll see a very strongly upward trend in rents. And so this is 2012, this is 2014. So it looks like the rents have continued to go up since this Homes for a Changing Region report was published. And actually, if you look at this data further down, Kane and Kendall counties were the second highest growth rate in terms of cost of rent of any of the counties in metropolitan Chicago, behind only McHenry County. So I think the point is that even though the Homes for a Changing Region report had this statement in it, I think that affordability has only continued to deteriorate in the several years since this report was adopted. To speak a little bit about some of the concerns, and I applaud the community for using the Freedom of Information Act to review all of our documentation. We hope that it makes our project stronger. We estimate, and this is from our market study, so again the question is, where are these people coming from? And the market study that was submitted to IDA as part of our report says that we estimate up to 75% of the tenants will come from the primary market area. And so the primary market area is identified in this map here. And what they've identified is I-88 on the south, the Geneva city limit on the north, the Kane-DuPage County line on the east, and then there's kind of a meandering line that is sort of part of Batavia and Geneva and a little bit of North Aurora to the west. And so this is where the market analyst reports that people are going to be coming from. The other bit of confusion that I wanted to address here is what our target market is. Somebody at the last report mentioned that we are building seniors or disabled housing. We are proposing family housing. We have some units set aside for individuals or families with disabilities, but this is not age-restricted or disabled-only housing. That's an important distinction. I'm not going to go through all of this information, but again, this is some more information from our market study questioning whether there is a demand for these units. There are 3 key indicators in a market study that determine how strong the need is to build new affordable housing in a community. Capture rate is one of them, the number of units at a given income level in the project compared to the market area population at or below that income level. So according to the analysis that our market analyst did and we submitted to IDA, the capture rate for our project is below 1.1% at all income levels, including unrestricted market rate units. So this means that we are only capturing about 1% of the total supply for people who can afford those units in the market. The penetration rate is the total number of restricted units in the market area compared to the market area population that would qualify for these incomes. And so in this case, that would include the 80 units we've proposed, plus the Batavia Apartments project. Those are really the 2 properties that were considered here. So we are at a just over 5% penetration rate. IDA's maximum that IDA considers to be kind of a danger zone for a penetration rate is 25%. So we are well below the level that IDA considers to be suitable from a market perspective. Finally, the absorption rate, how quickly units will lease up once construction is complete and we're beginning to market them to potential tenants. We are estimating that we will absorb units in this property at about 11 units a month, which is about 7 months. And they went on to say, given very limited existing affordable competition and high occupancy rates across the market area, we expect these units to be absorbed at a rate of approximately 11 units a month. Wanted to address some of the specific concerns about the letter that we submitted for proximate opportunity area status. We followed all of the rules and requirements for requesting what's called proximate opportunity area status. The gentleman who discussed this issue was correct in that Batavia is not what IDA considers an opportunity area community, but Geneva is. And so we submitted an argument to IDA following all of their rules and requirements to say, look, because of the project's special nature, where it is, the fact that it's in District 304, we believe that we should be considered for this proximate opportunity area status, and IDA agreed. The Affordable Housing Planning and Appeal Act, APA, is something that is out there, and somebody raised a question about that. Communities that have less than 10% of their housing considered affordable are under the threshold for APA. Geneva is under this threshold. Batavia is a little bit over this threshold. And so there's a question that I thought was a really interesting question. Could Batavia and Geneva collaborate and share credit for this project under APA? We are certainly happy to help facilitate those conversations with IDA, with the board at IDA that regulates this process. And if that's useful, then we will help with that. There are questions about the Aurora Housing Authority and what that means, and that's a question that will be going to the City Council, not specifically for the Plan Commission, but I wanted to address the questions. It's important to note that these are not public housing units. The 25 units that we've identified to be subsidized by project-based vouchers are not public housing units in the traditional sense. They are not owned, nor are they managed by the Aurora Housing Authority. They're units for which there will be provided a rental subsidy through a federal contract between the project owner and the Aurora Housing Authority. The Aurora Housing Authority has also agreed, after subsequent conversations with them, to allow us to set up what's called a site-based waiting list for the property. And that means that folks who are interested in coming to this community would come to the property first. We would review and approve their applications, and then we would send them to Aurora to be approved. So we would not be using the waiting list for people who are already at the Aurora Housing Authority. This is a separate waiting list and a separate process. For traffic and parking, I would like to ask Steve Corcoran, who is our transportation engineer with Erickson Engineering, to come up and address some of the questions that were raised previously.
Just the arrow? Good evening. My name is Steve Corcoran. I'm a traffic engineer with Erickson Engineering and prepared both the traffic and parking studies in your packet. And I just wanted to reiterate some of the things that were brought up. First, start with parking. As everyone knows, we are required to provide 301 parking spaces under the zoning code. We are basically providing 302 parking spaces on the site, but we're only building 206, not the 156 I think I've heard several times. We're building 206 parking spaces, and we feel that's what is needed to provide both for the commercial and residential based on national as well as local data that was summarized in our parking study. The rest of it, we're going to, the 96 spaces, we're going to land bank. And there were some questions on what is land banking. That is basically providing and showing on the site where those additional spaces will be, and so that they can be built if needed. Why don't we build them now, as some people ask? It's basically, we don't think we need them, they're not going to be used, and they're just going to be a bunch of pavement. So we want to keep it open with landscaping, reduces stormwater, and provides a benefit to, more landscaping on the site. Now, in terms of, well, what happens if we need more parking? Well, that's basically between the city and the developer. If the city sees there's a parking issue, they can come on site and ask the developer to build more parking. If the developer sees he has a need, he can do it. Obviously, he has to go back to the city to get approval for the construction. And that's how the parking is going to be handled if there's more need in the future. But based on the parking ratios for apartments and for the commercial, the 206 spaces are going to be more than adequate. The one thing we did not include in our analysis was what we call shared parking. Because we have two different users on this site. We have residential, which peak demand is in the evening and at night and overnight. And we have commercial, whose peak is basically, for most of the users, afternoon and early evening. And so there is some synergy and overlap where some parking spaces could be shared by both the residents or the commercial users, but we didn't even take that into account to be even more conservative analysis. Again, let's talk about the site characteristics in terms of traffic. We're talking, again, 80 apartments out there, and they don't generate a lot of traffic, just to the nature of apartments. We're talking about 40 morning and 50 trips, and that trip is defined as a car entering or exit the site. So less than a car a minute, it can be entering and exiting the site for the apartments. The commercial uses, we counted the cars going in and out. We've made no reductions, especially in the morning. Most of the morning traffic that we counted going in and out of the Campana site was for the construction vehicles that are currently stored on the northwest side of the site. Those are going to be gone because they're no longer going to be a tenant. And so we were conservative in keeping those traffic volumes. And again, based on the Batavia zoning code, there's a number of office and commercial uses that can be used in this building, and they will generate much more significant traffic volumes, as was discussed last time. The intersection of Fabian Parkway and 31, 40 to 50 vehicles, not all of them are going through that intersection, especially with our new internal roadway connection between the two sides of the property. Traffic can go to either 31 or Fabian and avoid the intersection. But in terms of impact on traffic operations at the current intersection as it currently exists, we're talking about delays less than a second change at the intersection due to just the site traffic. We are also looking at additional traffic growth at the intersection based on conversations with Kane County and with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. We came up with our traffic projections. And as you can see in this chart, the lighter green is basically the existing AM or PM peak hour traffic volumes at the intersection. That's all the traffic entering the intersection. So the darker green is the regional growth. Basically, we're required to show traffic projections about 5 years after completion or occupancy of the development. And then at the very top, you see a very light, about 20 cars, 26 cars being added to that intersection. So the impact of this development on operations is basically nominal, and we couldn't tell from day to day. That's just the daily fluctuation in traffic is greater than 20 vehicles an hour. Just before the last hearing, we received our first correspondence from the Kane County Division of Transportation. One thing we got to note here is I have to basically satisfy 3 entities with our traffic plan, and it's going to be a little bit of a negotiation. I have to satisfy you folks, the City of Batavia. I have to satisfy the King County as well as the Illinois Department of Transportation. To date, we submitted the same time we submitted to KDOT to IDOT. We have not received any correspondence back from them. And I did talk to them this morning, and I don't have a date that I could tell you that we're going to get a letter back from them, from IDOT. But there were 15 comments in the KDOT letter, and we're going to just briefly go through them. Number 1 and number 3 is a request for information. They just wanted to know the tenant list that's currently at the site and the tenants that are going to remain. We submitted that to you folks in our parking study. So we're going to comply. We'll provide that to them. The second comment is they're asking for the bus stop that's along Route 31 in front of our property. They want a bus pull out so that the bus can pull out of the through lane and not block traffic. PACE has a process to do that, and we submitted our site plan and traffic study to PACE for their review and concurrence or not concurrence. Based on my experience on the state routes in the suburbs, PACE actually does not want to do pullouts, but we will hear that officially from them. The reason is it's nice that the bus gets out of the way for traffic. It's very hard for them to pull back into traffic, and actually causes more disruptions than the disruptions we're saving by them not stopping out on the street. But again, we're waiting for PACE's official response, and then we'll let KDOT and them work through that. KDOT has also asked us to revise the traffic projections. Our original report was based on the CMAP, the Chicago Metropolitan Area Agency for Planning's traffic projections for this area, which we're required to use by IDOT in that process, and that's in our report. KDOT has asked us to use slightly higher percentage growth, and the chart that you saw just before, we've already went ahead and made those changes and then used the higher growth rate. So that part has been completed. Questions number 5 and 6 have to deal with the internal roadway. Our original report did not have that internal connection between the east and west sides in there. Obviously, that's part of our site plan now, and we've updated our numbers accordingly, so that we're meeting their requirements. Number 7 has to do with directional distribution. They had some comments on that. We're going to make our changes, and again, we've revised as requested. Question number 8 has to do with the improvements. One is the crosswalk that's been discussed a number of times. Obviously, we're providing a crosswalk across the west leg of Fabian Parkway and adding pedestrian signals, so that's part of the plan. We're discussing turn lanes on the Fabian Parkway access. It's kind of, we need to discuss that with them a little more, because their next comment is, they said long-term, our Fabian Parkway may be right in, right out based on, depending on the final design of the Fabian 31 intersection improvements. So it really makes no sense to build turn lanes or left turn lanes if they're going to be disappearing shortly thereafter. So that's a negotiation we're still working through with KDOT. Number 10, they requested an intersection beacon. That's just their name for a street light by our Campana entrance, or Fabian Parkway entrance. So they want a light on our property illuminating our driveway in the plan. But they call it a beacon. So it's not the little yellow flashing light, it's the actual street light, it's for the better word. Access to the adjacent property. If you go out there and pull into the Campana or entrance, you can make an immediate left, and there's like a gravel road on the property, the parcel that's not part of this project, immediately to the west. There is no cross-access easement. That's just a road. I don't know the history that was formed. That's not going to be there in the future, and it doesn't meet KDOT standards in terms of separation, because we don't want people to pull in there and stop and make an immediate left because then that blocks people behind them coming in off that entrance. They've asked for right-of-way. That's already been shown on the plat, the preliminary plat that's been provided, so we've accommodated that request. Internal roadway spacing, we need a variance because they want the internal road, according to their code, has to be 500 feet away from Fabian Parkway. Well, that puts it in the middle of our building, and we can't provide it. But they want the connection, so we're going to have to ask a variance. The side question is, why don't we put it around the north side of the building? Well, we don't have enough room there. It's only like 21 feet wide from the edge of the building to the property line, plus it's like a 6 to 8 foot drop, so we can't get an alternate roadway around the north side, and also may interfere with that ditch to the north. Stormwater will provide as needed if we do any improvements in the right-of-way, and then sidewalk, they've requested a sidewalk basically from our across our property, outside the right-of-way, and then we go in an extended west in front of the 2 parcels and then the residential parcels to Allen Drive. So our intent is to show that. Last time we had a report from KLOA on our questions on our comments on our traffic study. Number one, they suggested we count at the medical office building. Again, why we know, as explained, we know some people park there. It's not going to really impact the traffic study. Plus, we've also, again, we never reduced the traffic volume, so we would have to reduce the traffic volumes, add in, I think it's going to be a wash. Pedestrian volumes are low. It's what traffic engineers define, under 20 cars an hour, but we've also accounted for those in our analysis. Queuing discussion, they basically said, and obviously it's true, is in the morning, traffic's heading eastbound, so there's a backup from the traffic signal across the site and further to the west, and making it more difficult for people to make a left out of there. With our internal roadway connection, they will now have the option and go to make the right turn or go over to Route 31 and make the right turn and go south on 31, or use the signal to go further east on Fabian Parkway. Southbound PM, the same thing. Yes, it does back up southbound on 31, but again, with the internal roadway connection, people have the option to use the Fabian access in lieu of that if there is congestion. One other comment was brought up was that Fabian Parkway and 31 is what we call a 5% location or high accident location. Obviously, everyone knows that. KDOT has known that for a long time, and they've done a lot of studies that go well much deeper than what we would possibly do, and we're relying on those as far as future mitigation. And a lot of the mitigation has to do with making changes to that improvement that are really not within the bounds of this project, like changing the alignment, as we know, the kink in Fabian Parkway and things like that. Directional distribution, they commented on ours, just like KDOT do, but they said something totally different than KDOT, and since KDOT's approving our access, we're following their recommendations. And they recommend the internal roadway, well, it's already there. Capacity analysis, they questioned some of the details. We've made those changes as appropriate, and the numbers, the capacity analysis you saw reflect those, and again, they didn't have a major influence on the traffic analysis. Move Route 31 access, that is, we're waiting to hear from IDOT's opinion, but also we have some historical issues because that location would basically then warp the circular drive, and so we're looking to, again, get IDOT's opinion on that. And then auto turns, we've provided those for the maneuvering on the city, and you'll see those in the later slides. So.
Thank you, Steve. Moving on to other site issues. There was a question raised about why don't we have sidewalks serving the so-called racetrack in front of the building. And for those of you who were here on Monday evening at the Historic Preservation Commission, we actually did have Anthony Rubano up from Springfield. I think he provided a lot of detailed information about how the Historic Preservation world, really his agency, the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, which is the State Historic Preservation Office, and the federal government, the National Park Service, thinks about this racetrack. And so we just can't accommodate new sidewalks in that and maintain the historic integrity of what this element is in the history of the building. Providing wheelchair access to the bus stop, the plans do show an accessible path from the front door to the sidewalk down to the bus stop, and then handicap spaces in front of the building are close to the accessible entrance. A lighting analysis was included in the package provided to the Plan Commission. All site lighting is compliant with the city requirements, and it's designed to keep just about all of the light on site with minimal leakage to neighboring properties. The noise analysis is the issue cited in the environmental report, and I will come back to that toward the end. As one of the speakers noted, this is from Batavia Avenue into the building, so this is not noise generated by the building into any of the neighboring properties. The truck parking issue that somebody brought up, that was a short-term transitory construction truck parking agreement for a company that was doing some construction work nearby. That was a temporary issue. That contract has now expired. And as noted, I think by one of the earlier speakers, we will not be using that rear parking lot for truck traffic, although we do note that this project will be under construction for a little over a year. There will be some construction noise generated during construction, but we will follow all the required City of Batavia and City of Geneva requirements for when we can start and stop construction. Drainage and civil engineering. I'd like to ask Tim Brown, also from Erickson, to come up and talk about some of the drainage issues. All right. We've got Mike Renner, so.
Thank you, Plan Commission members. I have 4 brief slides, and I will try to make civil engineering understood by you all when we're completed with this. I'm Mike Renner, Principal Engineer with Erickson Engineering. And let's first talk about the impervious area study. There's been questions about are we providing detention? So what we had proposed is or what we prepared is what you see up here on the screen. There are colors that indicate various existing impervious areas. The green is an existing driveway. Blue is existing impervious area that will continue to be an impervious area. Red is new impervious area. So effectively, what we're trying to say is that the proposed plan only creates 15,355 square feet of net new impervious area. Why do I mention that number? Because it's below the 25,000 square foot threshold that Batavia and Kane County has in their ordinance. That's the threshold by which if you exceed that, then stormwater detention is required. There's been questions about the property to the north, the residential property at the northwest corner. So let's talk a little bit about Illinois drainage law, which governs properties in the state of Illinois. There's some definitions up there. A drain is a ditch or any means, a water course or conduit, whether open, closed, natural, or artificial. You can read it for yourself, but what's really important to take away from these 4 definitions that are under the Illinois Drainage Code is that this property already has a significant nexus or a connection to the drainage way that is north of our property, meaning that we are allowed by Illinois drainage law to, as indicated in there, upon our expense, we may go onto those lands, which there are existing drains, and repair them or provide erosion control measures where those existing connection points are. The second bullet item on this page is that our design utilizes those existing stormwater outfalls, and we intend to utilize those because by law we are allowed to use those outfalls, whether they be on the state property, the property to the north, or potentially connections to Fabian Parkway. Third bullet item is outfall pipes that will be televised prior to plan approval. That's a requirement by the city of Batavia, which we'll comply with to prove that they are functional and they are actually working. And then the final item there is, as I mentioned, erosion control will be provided for all the development that takes place on the property in order to avoid any significant erosion that happens during construction or after the project is completed. This is simply a slide that shows the existing drainage patterns on the property, and all I really want to show on this is that the red lines show existing storm sewers. That there's two up on the north, on the west side of the property that discharge to the drainage way. There's the line that is on the east side of the existing building that also discharges to the drainage way, and the other two are connections to the Route 31 roadway on the east side. And finally, this last slide, it addresses some of the questions that were brought up even tonight about, a little difficult to see, but I'll help you. Steve, if I can borrow your pointer for a second. There's been questions about fire trucks and or school buses and how they actually enter and maneuver about the site. The image on the left here is a drawing that shows fire truck access, and this drawing shows that fire trucks would enter potentially from Fabian Parkway right into the site, drive up this driveway, and get to this point at which, if they needed to turn around, they can do a 3-point turn and move back out of the site. So the truck can fully work within the geometry that's been proposed in our proposed geometrics. Also, the truck could also enter at this point, going northbound, come into the site, and navigate in a counterclockwise rotation, and either come back out this way and do a hairpin left turn out, or can come back out here and do a right out. So what we did is we analyzed the most difficult turns that the fire truck would make, whether it's a hairpin turn coming out right on 31 or a hairpin turn coming back out on Fabian Parkway. Either way, it can maneuver all of those. The right image shows a school bus entering. Again, we're coming from the north, anticipating that that's where the buses would come to pick up students and make that hairpin turn into the site, that right turn, and maneuver around this bus loop, again in a counterclockwise way, and could potentially then come to this point and make a right turn out. That would be, again, one of the more difficult maneuvers for that bus to make, but it still does make that maneuver. Likewise, if it was in this loop and decided to come south, it could also get to this point, this entry point, and make a left out coming this direction. Right out. Thank you. Left, right. But it can make all those maneuvers. So Steve has already mentioned that there's pedestrian access to the bus stop, which is the red line that's shown on this graph, shows coming down here and to the bus stop. The sidewalk is in the plan. We've talked about bus and emergency vehicle turning movements. And then finally, just to note that up here is where the removal of the truck docks and this northern addition, those would be removed. So we're not showing, maneuvers for WB55s coming into that area. That concludes civil engineering.
Thank you, Mike. Oop, we have an animation. How exciting. We're going to go fast through the rest of these because I think the more technical information has already been presented, so some of this information remains is more accessible. There are some questions brought up about the location of this site and whether this is a safe location, whether there will be people who will be walking from this property to grocery stores, to convenience stores, to find amenities. So this is showing the half mile, 1 mile, and 1.5 mile radiuses from the site. And I would submit that this location is really fundamentally no different than any of the other residential locations around there. Some of those folks walk to places, but I would bet that most of those folks who live there, if they want to go to the grocery store, more likely than not, they're going to drive. We all know this location. This is a photo at the intersection looking down the bridge and up Route 31. There was an anecdote brought up about somebody walking down Fabian Parkway across the bridge. I guess our only comment on that is there's sort of two contradictory impulses that we're hearing from the community. On the one hand, there is concern that there may be pedestrians from this site, and because people are lower income, they may not have cars, so they may be forced to walk places. But on the other hand, there's a question about whether we're going to have enough parking. So I'm not sure what the right way to look at that site is, but both of those questions and conditions can't be true at the same time. The next question was about taxes and fiscal impact and property values here. And lots of studies and counter studies presented. There was a recent study that was done online by a firm called Trulia, which is an online property site, saying essentially low-income housing has no effect on nearby home values. There was a more academic approach that was taken that was sponsored by the National Housing Policy Research Council. It was paid for by the MacArthur Foundation. I'm not going to go through all the details here, but essentially it references meta-analysis, so studies of studies. And there are 3 of these meta-analyses listed in the table on the left, or on the bottom right. So what you see is 3 separate studies which include anywhere from 31, 36 to 18 different academic studies. Some of them show positive impacts on property values nearby. Most of them show neutral impacts on property values nearby. A few of them show negative impacts on property values nearby, and some of them show indeterminate impacts nearby. So I think very clearly there is no consensus in the academic community about the potential impact of mixed income housing or low income housing on adjacent property values. One of the studies I wanted to read from you because I think it gives a pretty fair consensus of what the research is showing. This is from a study, a woman named M.T. Nguyen, called Does Affordable Housing Detrimentally Affect Property Values? A Review of the Literature. This is from the Journal of Planning Literature, which is an academic journal of the American Planning Association. After 40 years and 17 studies, there are more unanswered questions about the relationship between affordable housing and property values now than ever before. In their desire to provide more affordable housing to those populations in need, there are many promoters of affordable housing, that's me, who would like to say that neighboring property values do not decline. However, recent studies tell us that affordable housing can indeed lower property values. But there is more to the story. The likelihood that property values will decline as a result of proximity to affordable housing increases when, 1, the quality, design, and management of the affordable housing is poor. Number 2, affordable housing is located in dilapidated neighborhoods that contain disadvantaged population, i.e. usually low income and predominantly minority. And 3, when affordable housing residents are clustered. In contrast, instances in which affordable housing appears to have no effect occur when, 1, affordable housing is sited in healthy and vibrant neighborhoods. 2, the structure of the affordable housing does not change the quality or character of the neighborhood. 3, the management of affordable housing is responsive to problems and concerns. And 4, affordable housing is dispersed. Furthermore, the evidence reveals that rehabilitated housing always has beneficial incomes for neighboring property values. I wanted to address the property tax issue head-on here, the notion that the property should be paying its own way. So I looked at the District 304 2015-2016 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. What you see on the top right there is the enrollment for District 304, starting back in 2002, 2003, and then going through 2013, 2014. So you can see that it was on an upward trend for a while, and it peaked around 2007, 2008. And the school population, the enrollment at District 304 has actually been modestly declining over the last few years. So in 2015-16, which is the most recent report available, the enrollment was 5,836 students. And if you look at the graph on the right, that is pretty close to the 2005-2006 numbers. So the student population in District 304 has gone back, almost 10 years to what the population was back then. Total expenses for what District 304 does in the most recent year was $103.3 million, or $17,700 per student. Property taxes paid to the school district were $81.1 million, or $13,896 per student. So I think that's where that $14,000 per student came from. The residential share of the school district's assessed value was 74%. So in other words, 74% of the school's property taxes come from residential uses, and the rest come from commercial or other uses. So if you look at that 74% and you multiply it by the $13,896 per student, that's $10,283 per student that is coming from residential uses. If you look at the property taxes paid by most of the homes in the Allendale neighborhood, they're in the $8,000 to $10,000 a year range. I didn't look at all of them, but I just looked at a sampling of them. And the most recent share of taxes to the school district, as I think one of the previous speakers noted, was 67.9%. So if you take that $8,000 to $10,000 per home and you apply that 67%, the typical Allendale home pays about $5,400 to $6,800 a year to District 304. So if you look at this according to the pay your own way standard, the typical share, the typical tax bill for a family that is sending 3 kids to the Geneva schools would be $45,000. And I get that by taking that $45,000 and multiplying it by 67.9% and dividing it by 3 kids. That's how a typical family would be paying their way, or paying their full share of District 304 taxes. I would note that since 2006, the Campana building owners have paid just under $1 million in property taxes to District 304, as noted previously, without using any school services. And over the building's 80-year history, it's likely that the building has paid more than $2 million in school district taxes. The slide up on the top right, which I suspect some in the audience may disagree with, is a quote that's engraved on the Internal Revenue Service building in Washington that says, "Taxes are what we pay for a civilized society." I would just submit that the pay your own way approach to taxes is not the way it works in our communities, and that this property has more than paid its fair share over the building's 80-year history, and now it's time to find a new use for the building.
Please, the applicant sat through 4 to 5 hours of testimony without interruption. He is due his time. You'll all get a chance to respond when he's done. Thank you.
Wanted to talk about property management questions very briefly. At Evergreen Real Estate Group, we manage about 6,500 properties around the country. We take a holistic approach to property management. We're focused on the safety, security, and satisfaction of our residents. We want to be accountable and economically integrated to the communities in which we work. As we've discussed numerous times, we are regulated at multiple levels by the state, by the federal government, by the county, and even by the city of Batavia. And yes, we have obligations to our investors and our shareholders in terms of the financial performance of our properties. We believe in the community, and part of our approach to community is maintaining safe and clean buildings, being part of the broader neighborhood, and assisting tenants with services they may need. We believe in the economic impacts of our projects and in openness in our communities. So whenever possible, we like to buy local. We like to use local vendors for property management supplies. And if possible, we will hire a property manager who is from the local community and understands the local community. We have numerous overlapping obligations when it comes to tenant outreach and marketing. We have the obligation to affirmatively market the project. We have to put together a tenant selection plan, and we are subject to federal fair housing law requirements, which is why we always need to display the equal housing sign, as any landlord with a multifamily property must do. We use local community service agencies, including AID and others, to work with our tenants. We like to join local neighborhood associations, and we like to work closely with our local aldermen to make sure that we're serving the needs of their community and their constituents. We have rigorous standards for approving our tenants. We do a criminal background check going back 10 years. We do a credit check that's required for any tenants who want to have utilities in their own name. We check with previous landlords going back 5 years to make sure that the tenants were good tenants. They didn't disturb their neighbors, and they left their units in good repair. And we do an income verification because obviously we're required to check the incomes pretty carefully for these kinds of units. Everyone who is in the unit needs to be named on the lease. There are a maximum number of tenants allowed per unit, depending on on unit size. The leases are renewed annually, and we are very strict about violations of lease terms. We inspect our units 4 times a year, and then because we're going to have a rental assistance contract, the Housing Authority in Aurora will also be inspecting according to federal standards. We communicate often and early with our tenants through flyers and newsletters and emails. And we have house rules, things like pet policies and visitor policies. This will be a non-smoking building. You have your city occupancy standards, and we enforce parking carefully. And if necessary, if parking becomes a problem, we will do parking placards to make sure that people are parking in the right place, and we'll have a tow contract to make sure that the people who are actually registered their cars with us are the ones who are parking in the lot. All residents need to sign and abide by the house rules, and we will evict for folks who are violating them. There were questions about the property in Elgin. I'm almost done. Property in Elgin, and folks cited some crime statistics there. The property in Elgin, which is actually 3 separate properties, is called Buena Vista Apartments, Buena Vista Townhomes, and Buena Vista Tower. It is a fundamentally different property than what we are talking about here today. It was built in the 1960s and 70s. It is a very large, multi-building campus property that has a total of 447 units. So it's about, 5-6 times the size of what we're proposing here in Batavia. So between these 2 properties, among this 447 units, from the beginning of 2016 to the present, there were 95 arrests at the Townhomes and Apartments project and 9 arrests at the Tower project. Of that number, 24 at the apartments and 2 at the tower were for criminal trespass. And that's important to note because those were people, more likely than not, that we called the police on or that the neighbors called the police on because they were people who, whether it was a visitor or a friend or a relative, had been causing problems. And they came to the property and they were creating difficulty, and we said, "You're not to come back here anymore." They came back here, we had them arrested. There are also 14 people at the apartments and townhome property who were arrested for driving without a license. More likely than not, that was an opportunity for a policeman who followed somebody into the site who may have been doing something suspicious, and they were arrested because they were driving without a license. So of the remaining other arrests in that year and a half period, there were 57 arrests at the apartments, townhomes, and 7 arrests at Buena Vista Tower. So the ratio there is 0.27 and 0.09. So if we applied a comparable ratio to an 80-unit property, there might be between 7 and 22 arrests at this property over a 19-month period. I'm not sure how that compares with any other location in Batavia, but I suspect it's not appreciably higher. People also want to know, what about eviction statistics? and they want to know, do we evict people? And the answer to that is yes, we do. So again, we've broken it out by each of the 3 separate properties. We evicted a number of people for non-payment of rent. We evicted about 10 people for the criminal activity. But more importantly, we also had a large number of people who moved out before the eviction was completed. Typically, tenants don't like to be evicted because it actually affects their ability to find other housing. And so when threatened with eviction, most tenants who know they've done something wrong, who don't have a case to fight us in court, will move out prior to the court ruling on it. And so in total, if you add up those columns, there were 60 people evicted from the property in a 2-year period. And again, on a 447 unit property, that indicates a pretty serious commitment to maintaining the health, safety, and welfare of everyone who's living in that community and following the rules. This is a picture of the Buena Vista Apartments. This was actually a picture that I visited the property the day that I gave a tour to 2 aldermen from Geneva who had requested a fact-finding mission with us. And so we were there. It was a beautiful Saturday morning, and we saw people walking their dogs, doing their laundry, maybe driving to work. It looked like any other apartment building, and that is our goal. We want to maintain Campana as a fabulous historic resource, but at the end of the day, we want the neighbors, we want the community to drive by it and say, okay, it's an old building, it's an apartment building, and that's it. And that, I think, is the ultimate objective. A little bit about process and schedule here. We had a number of meetings with city staff going all the way back to spring of 2016. We reached out to several aldermen from Batavia. One of them wanted to meet with us. Others have said, you know what, we'd rather wait for the public hearing process, which is fine. As noted, we met with District 304. We've offered tours of the property for interested parties. We went to the Committee of the Whole back in May. Also in May, we had this request for a tour of the property from 2 aldermen in Geneva. The mayor was actually included, the mayor of Geneva was included in that request as well. He decided not to go, I think partly for open meeting reasons. So I toured 2 aldermen from Geneva around our property in Aurora, these properties in Elgin, and then we went up to our other property in Mundelein. After that meeting, they requested of us that, hey, it might be a good idea for Evergreen to come up and meet with some of the neighbors and talk a little bit about what you're doing. So we said, sure, we're happy to do that. In the meantime, we saw that the notocampana.com website had been posted, and we emailed that website in June and said, hey, we thank you for your interest and your concern. We're happy to come and meet with you. I'm still waiting for a response from them. In the meantime, we were talking with the aldermen in Geneva and the mayor about setting up this meeting, which was scheduled for June 7th. We were originally invited to that meeting to come talk to the neighbors in Allendale primarily, but from other parts of Geneva, to talk about the project and to address their concerns. Shortly before the meeting, we were uninvited because what we heard is that the neighbors wanted to have the conversation with the aldermen internally without us there, which is fine. But then we had hoped and expected maybe that there would be some follow-up and that we would be able to go talk with the neighborhood. That was never scheduled. There was a public meeting that we hosted that the Fox River Valley Initiative had scheduled at the Congregational Church here. We had that. We met with the leadership of the Homestead. We offered to come present this project to their residents. They thanked us for our interest, but they decided not to take us up on that. And then the rest of the process is what we've all been living the dream in the last few weeks here. So the other process and schedule issue I wanted to raise, in connection with Mr. Kiefer's concern, is we have read the legal issues raised by the letter he sent to the city. Clearly, we disagree with the position taken by the letter. We are represented by council here, and we and the seller of the building obviously are watching him in particular very carefully to make sure that everybody's rights are protected. including ours. I wanted to bring one last point before I come to the final set of slides, and that's process and schedule. At the last meeting, you talked about Tangent Technologies, and there was an approval for what they were doing there. And I think there's a big picture here that we're going to ask the Plan Commission to look at. After that meeting, I went to the owner of Tangent, and I introduced myself. I congratulated him for his work in Batavia, and I asked him, if he could tell me what the people who are going to work in this new plant are paid. He didn't tell me exactly, but he gave me a rough idea, and I would say that just about all of the folks who are going to work at the Tangent plant would be eligible for housing in this building based on the income limits that are there. And so with this project and the Tangent project and other things, there begins to be kind of a synergistic approach to economic development in Batavia. There are new jobs attracted at a variety of levels, and then housing opportunities to allow those folks who are going to be new workers in the community to live in the community, to shop in your stores, to eat in your restaurants, to go to your library, to go to good local schools, and to preserve historic resources that make the community unique. And so we think that's a pretty great approach to overall economic development. Finally, I need to get to the questions about our credibility and whether we provided accurate information and the details of the information we provided. I'm going to go through the questions very quickly. Again, people have used the Freedom of Information Act to look at a lot of our correspondence, and there is a lot of our correspondence. There was a question about the number of students, and they looked at an email that Nicolette, one of our project manager for this, had sent to District 304, and the number of students cited in that email was higher than the 26 students that we cited. What they didn't note was that in that email, there was a question right below that and say, I would love your input on this calculation and how you would do it. So it was a question. It was an opportunity to work collaboratively with District 304 rather than a definitive statement. After that email and after those conversations, we analyzed our database, and our database indicated, and I'm not going to go through the detail of the calculation, but our database indicated the number of students who would be likely to be in school in the various categories of units in this project. And we concluded the 26 number. That was based on a portfolio analysis of 915 project-based voucher units with or without tax credits, 284 tax credit-only units, and 152 market rate units. So there's a pretty good data sample there. There was a question about the number of teachers from Batavia or Geneva who could qualify based on an assertion that I made. First of all, we were explicit about the number of people in the household. We said our statement was based on the fact that it was a single earner, so one person with 3 children. And I don't know if that's a typical situation. I suspect it's not, but we did look at the publicly available data. So in response to the question, I went back and I checked my math again. And so my assertion was 97 out of 419 teachers in District 304 and 64 out of 430 teachers in District 101. I checked it again. So if it's full-time only, in Geneva, it's 74. If you add in the people who are at 50% time or greater, it's another 17. So we come up with 91. I was off by 6. I included some folks who were less than 50% time in my analysis. I looked at the Batavia data. 39 if it was full-time teachers only. If you add in the people who are at 50% time or greater, it was another 17 or 56. So I was off by 8. Again, we looked at part-time versus full-time. I'm happy to discuss this with the folks who have questions. Question about the date of the construction of the West Wing. We actually talked about this on Monday night at the Historic Commission. The current wing is from the late 80s or early 90s. Yes, there was a wing there earlier that was substantially reconstructed, as noted at the Historic Commission last night. It's not a historic element, so it's irrelevant to the Historic Preservation Plan. There was a statement that I'm ignoring the locally sourced tax revenue because, of course, Geneva and Batavia residents pay federal taxes. Well, we all know that. I'm not sure we need to say more about that. Finally, because Mr. Kiefer is so dogged in his analysis of the work that we've done, I wanted to cite the noise analysis issues that he brings up. We looked at this and then we corrected this information, and we also looked at the construction of the building. And the sound analysis of the wall materials, even if you're at the higher sound level that does come from having trucks, and we acknowledge that there are trucks on Fabian Parkway and Route 31, that the sound transmission criteria, the STC rating for the wall, is a net 38. And what that means is that dampens the sound by that level. It's a calculation, but basically the point is it brings that project well below the required sound threshold inside the building. My last point here is that this is a complicated project. It's a $30 million mixed income, mixed use, adaptive reuse of an 80-year-old building. It's an iterative process. And so we do the best we can with sometimes imperfect information at a certain stage in the process, and we always do our best to be clear and consistent in our communication with all the stakeholders, the City of Batavia, and I hope that the staff here would attest that we're certainly doing our best to work well and respond to your questions and comments with the best available information at the time. We're not perfect. Sometimes we make mistakes, and we try to correct that information when we get corrected. We stand by our reputation. The top slide there, the top image, is the Illinois Housing Development Authority annual report, digital annual report. Our project in Aurora was featured on their annual report. IDA wouldn't do that if they didn't think well of us as a developer. Finally, I want to read you a letter, a portion of a letter from Mayor Tom Weisner of Aurora after the completion of our Aurora St. Charles Senior Living Project, which is a similar scale, complex, adaptive reuse of a historic building. I'm writing to thank you and your entire staff at the development company for exceeding every expectation that the City of Aurora had going into the Aurora St. Charles Senior Living Project. In the month following the wonderful groundbreaking ceremony, I have heard nothing but praise from the community for this project that is delivering a huge win to our downtown through this top-notch historic restoration of Aurora's Sleeping Beauty. As I indicated in my remarks at the groundbreaking, the beautiful St. Charles Hospital may have been asleep for many years now, but that makes its rescue that much more exciting and significant for the City of Aurora and its residents. On behalf of my staff and all the residents of Aurora, please accept our thanks for the hard work, determination, and professionalism that embodied each aspect of your work as you helped write a great chapter in Aurora's story of revitalization and renewal. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you. Okay, so
I'd like to make a motion.
We had one individual who deferred.
We had two others that signed up afterwards. We had one that deferred and two additional that signed up afterwards. So.
Okay. Understanding the late hour, and I don't know how many people want to speak a second time. We're not going to deliberate tonight, I can tell you that right now. We're all fading out of our chairs here. And there's a lot of information that we really need to absorb and give serious consideration to before we go into those deliberations. So I think in light of the hour, I'd like to continue the public hearing to I think it's August 30th, which would be 2 weeks from tonight. We'd hear the balance of the public testimony. We'll have the applicant here again to respond, and if there's any follow-up questions, we'll allow that before we close the public hearing. So with that said, is everyone on the commission in agreement with that?
I am.
Okay. So with that, we'll entertain a motion to...
I'll also move that we continue the public hearing until August 30th.
7 p.m.
7 p.m.
At 7 p.m. here in the room, in this room.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so thank you all very much for coming.
but it was, we haven't.